Good viewer, you are watching Xirtus. This is because Xirtus makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Xirtus for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Xirtus, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Xirtus. Your friends will come to like Xirtus, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Xirtus. See, that was easy.
So long as I'm in this Oval Office.
What's this?
What's that?
You're John Paul Larson.
Yeah,
Good
I'm
to see
JP
you.
Larson.
What are you wearing? What are you wearing there on that wall of yours?
So this is a shape that is commonly found in the Book of Soiga. Something I brought up in the video yesterday.
It looks like the ships in Tron. I like it. Look at this man right here, sucking on a wheat thin. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good. You're looking pretty Welsh this morning, you know.
Welsh. What do you
That's
mean?
my new catch. Like if someone's looking good, like you see a girl, you're like, "Hey, you Welsh?" Because you look amazing. Okay. That's the new pickup line. You know.
You like sheep?
So how you been? How you been, Lukey?
I've been good. I mean, 5 minutes ago, I was just walking down the street, and this van pulls up. 5 Russian dudes pull a bag over my head, pull me into the back, and here I am streaming with Andreas. So
it's the rules.
Just how it goes.
Well, it's the early.
But they gave me this,
stream.
so I'm okay. You know, they
Yeah.
gave me this. He said, "Sit down. You talk to the man." You know, it didn't sound like that. He said, "You sit down. You talk to Andreas, and then you enjoy this. Yes, you'll enjoy stream."
You enjoy.
And then I said, "Okay, I will enjoy stream. Thank you."
Stay chill. It's weird when Russian guys say "stay chill." I always found that kind of adorable.
Yeah, it's a good job you can't see the laser pointer on my forehead.
Well,
making me uncomfortable, but
I called this stream the early birds again because I kind of want to have an early morning stream, but there's no such thing because it's 5 p.m. where you are. So it's the early birds of the evening for you, you know.
Yeah, I thought it was my day off. You know, I woke up. I was like, "Oh, there's some beers. I'll grab those. I don't need to stream today."
What's the dog do on his day off? Not lie around. That's his job.
That's why I'm in my puffy jacket. You know, well, I was out.
This is a dumb.
I drink in the streets. You know, obviously, I don't drink at home. I walk the streets with beers in hand, looking at anyone that might stare at me weird.
like Kate Middleton. This is a dumb conspiracy that we brought up yesterday. As Americans, I felt like I didn't care because yesterday was the first time I actually committed Middleton to my name in my memory. The name Middleton had not been stored in my brain yet because I
Do you not remember Pippa?
Pippa?
Yeah.
No.
No, Pippa
Pig?
was, yeah.
I don't. Who's Pippa? She was like,
That's it.
did she have an affair with him? Which one was she?
No, Pippa's the sister. She just had a great ass. So at the royal
yeah?
wedding, all the cameras were pointed at her ass.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, some of
Yeah.
these Gaelic derrieres are, you know, in their own form. Although I don't know, man. Some of your women.
Type in Pippa Middleton ass, and you'll see what the media was on
I have
about.
moderate search on, right? Just 1 second. I gotta make sure.
Okay.
I unfortunately keep up with none of the royal family. My wife, on the other hand, would understand everything.
Really?
Okay.
Oh
This
yeah,
is,
this is what it was all about. This was what it was about. Yeah,
That's
it was
nice. I feel like that's kind of that's
Well,
slightly better than Taylor Swift. That's all we got going on there.
Yeah, well,
That's
that
more
was what the
impressive. Is
media
that the
went
same
for.
one? Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's relatable. People are like, "Hey, look, bigger is better," you know, something like that.
Exactly.
Is that her? Is this her showing her booty? So clearly, this was all part of some sort of like a media plan to say like
Big
British
ass
women's
Pippa.
booties are good.
Mm.
Big ass Pippa. Okay.
I mean, they're not generally from experience, but there are, you know.
So an engineered meme?
It's an engineered Tavistokian meme to make breeding happen between middle-class white British Labour Partyists and Tories. Yeah? Is that what it looks like? I mean, that's what I got out of the bald king, right? Because, like, he's got this look now like your upper middle-class British yuppie. They look like your most boring suburban British people. They don't look royal anymore. They wear, like, normal outfits that look like they're from Pasadena or Los Altos.
To be fair, have you seen him when he had hair? Then the man was pretty gorgeous.
Yeah. When he had hair, he looked kind of like his mother. But now, like, he's assumed the role of his father. It's like kind of sad. Yeah. No, he looked all right. Like, but that's the other thing. Like, we talked about this for a second yesterday. Diana, tennis coach. You know the conspiracy, right? This is Princess Diana's tennis coach. So there's a lot to be said about that. Right? Like, why is there such an ostracization of Harry? Because Harry's like so much clear, like so much.
It
more,
could just also be because he's ginger.
Yeah, that's true. But they're all kind of they're both kind of ginger because they got the Spencer blood. Well, okay. People don't know about England very much, so that's why I was asking you because you're kind of a victim of the culture, so you know about it. Like, what do you think's going on? Because they're saying Kate Middleton's been Princess Diana by the son of Princess Diana. How likely is it that he's killing his own wife just like his mother was killed? Like, what do you think? What's really going on? Is Kate Middleton divorced?
I think this is a load of nonsense, to be honest.
Just like trying to get us to memorize her name.
Yeah, no, genuinely, I think this is a load of nonsense. I mean, yesterday I went onto Twitter. I hadn't been on in a while, and I saw a load of people telling me that King Charles had died, and I realized that they were a day old, and he hadn't died. And then I realized that this is just all part of the same kind of group, isn't it? You know, they just want to manufacture nonsense,
same troll bullshit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it damages the movements as well because you'll find that a lot of the people, for example, I noticed a lot of Tartaria, especially history-related groups posting about it, and it's like if you're posting alternate history, and you get caught up in this kind of stuff, it just makes you look a fool, doesn't it? You know, if you're sat there promoting, Kate Middleton's been replaced with a body double.
I find it the worst if you're as an American, because like when Americans talk about like that's why I was even hesitant to comment on the situation because it's like, why? How dare I hate it? I hate when Americans talk about the royal family because it's like so many levels of ignorance away from the object, and Americans love to vain pretensity like that we know what's going on. So imagine like when you watch Super Bowl Sunday, you're like, oh, how hilarious, this is the Americans sport event, this will be like a cultural, it's kind of interesting how Americans behave. But with Americans, if we were to watch like cricket or something, they're like, what the hell is this? And then they'd pretend like they knew what it was. You know what I mean? And that's what I feel like is going on with the royal family thing. They're like, obviously I know what's happening. It's like, but you don't even know her name.
Well, I mean, the thing is I mean, in Britain, there's definitely a clear divide, and I'd say most of us don't care about the royal family. I'm anti-royalist. I don't believe in that
I can
anyway.
tell from your accent.
Thank you.
Do you believe? Do you think that
do I
there's
give off that?
a more of a yearning, or people who want a disconnection, and that's why this is gaining traction, more or less?
Yeah, right. Like they're like,
I
dude,
mean, well,
maybe she's missing, and people talk
Or there's
about
more
her.
people who are less pro royal, and just like pro whatever.
Well, I'd say the loyalists are more. They're usually more right wing. So in our country, we have the Conservatives and then Labour, obviously, but Labour aren't really left wing. I mean, you guys have a similar thing where your left wing
Yeah.
isn't really left wing. You don't actually have a left wing option. You have a right wing or a slightly less right wing. And then you get the centrists.
Left.
Yeah, exactly. And our left wing isn't left wing at all. It's entirely funded by the Israel Party. Like the amount of clicks between those two is insane. That's why if you look at what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, he was completely taken down by the Israel lobbyists. And there's a great documentary on that. So many parts into it, but it's Al Jazeera. If you look up the Labour Files by Al Jazeera, that goes really into that, and it's brilliant because it just shows how deep the Israel lobbyists are into the supposed left wing of the British political establishment.
Dude, meanwhile, I had a cousin who fought in Iraq, and when he found out that I was like doing CNN podcasts and like back years ago, like 2012, like talking about Al Jazeera and things, as an American military guy that early on, he was so upset. Like he's like, we're fighting against this. So that's the other thing is like people have divided themselves from this sort of data. They don't want to know this exists because they think the source. I mean, Al Jazeera, it's a funny name.
Well, I think to go back to what JP said, I think the media probably is capitalizing on the fact that there are a huge contingent now that wants to move away from the royals, and in particular, people were talking about King Charles being the last, and then maybe going down to Prince William being the last kind of thing, but it's never really going to change, I don't think. Anyway,
you don't think it's way different than it was 500 years ago or 100 years ago?
No.
Well, right. The thing is, you've got to remember about this is that the king hasn't had power since, realistically, it's hard to put an exact date on it, but the king hasn't really had power since the 1700s. But if you want to go even earlier, you could say the king hasn't had power since before then as well, because you got to remember that we had a civil war in Britain in the 1600s. Cromwell took over because people thought, right, this king he's not doing a good job and we need to take over. But that was funded by bankers in the city of London. What kicked that off was that some MPs had done some trouble, and the king wanted to arrest them, and they ran into the city of London, and the city of London shut their gates. And the king was outside going, open the gates. And they were like, no, we're not going to open the gates. And that's what caused the civil war, was
amongst
the
other
bankers
things.
Well, amongst other things, well, that was the kickoff point.
That's a good kickoff point. But
you're saying the kickoff point was
it's your country. Keep on going.
So you're saying the kickoff point was 1600s and not 1200 Magna Carta?
Yeah, I was going to say the Battle of Hastings kind of introduces
or was that just the original influence?
Well, I mean,
because you're a native.
It's a very long topic to go into because I mean,
sorry, as a Slav, I would go back 1,000 years. I hear you.
Well, I mean, because British history goes a lot further than they say. So you've got to remember that in the 1700s there was a huge Anglo-Saxon kind of vibe that came about because they wanted
the
to
Germanics.
They wanted to say, look, we're all Germans, really. We're all, and to be fair, those Germans are Scythians, but that's another topic on its own. So they just sit there going, look, we're Germans, it's fine. He's a German, we're a German. Really, look, we're Anglo-Saxons, and I mean, the original history of Britain goes back hundreds of years. I'm going to have a review coming out soon. There's a woman that I did an interview with last year when my channel was very, very early, called Marshall Abrahams, and she's just released a new book which I'm going to get a copy of and do a review soon on these migrations to Britain. One of them was in about 1600 BC-ish, and it was by the Assyrians, under a person called Albine. And then that follows up with the Trojan migrations under like Brutus. So after the Trojan War, the Trojans left. They a lot of them migrated to Italy, which became the Etruscans, the Etrurians, and then they became the Romans. And a party of them, basically, Brutus's story is that his mum died in childbirth, and he then accidentally killed his father while they were hunting. He had a bow and
It
arrow, and he
happens.
accidentally shot his dad with a bow and arrow. And the Etruscans were like, "Get out!
Yeah.
You're a cursed child." And there'd been a prophecy that he'd kill both his parents, so they'd been like, "Oh my god, he's fulfilled the prophecy. Get out!" So
Already.
he went back to Troy, and he found a load of the remnants of the Trojans. Troy had been destroyed, loads of the Trojans, and they recognized him as a descendant of Aeneas,
Oh, that's good.
Aeneas the Trojan, and they were like, "Oh, okay, well, we'll come with you then." And at the same time, there was supposedly a load of the tribes, a portion of the tribe of Israel called the Cymry or Cimbri, from the Kimmeroy kind of element, and they were there as well. So they all got on boats, traveled to Lemnos in Greece, where the Greeks basically built them a fleet and sent them all the way back to sent them to Britain. So they sailed this fleet around to Britain. And that's how the British were associated with Brutus, and that's why London originally was called New Troy. A lot of people don't know that, but it was originally called Nova Troia, and yeah, that's
For the very reason, yeah, and because because the Romans were imagining Troy as their origin point, so it was like we're building our new Atlantis, but our new Atlantis is New Troy because we're the Romans. Yeah,
well, that's the thing though. But these guys weren't really Romans yet. So after you've got to imagine, 400-500 years pass, the Etruscans have now gone and the Romans replace.
yeah.
But Caesar knew about the British. This is why history is a bit falsified, because they say that the British were just these Celtic tribes. They're just Celtic tribes, and they didn't really have much education, or they didn't really know what they're
Oh,
talking
right.
about.
Like the idea that they weren't, because they're hugely connected tribes all over Eurasia and Africa, even, right? So they're connected peoples.
But I mean, even more, the fact is that these people are the same descendants from the Etruscans. So you got to remember the Romans are calling the British uneducated, but they're from the same people.
They're not saying that they're bad genes. They're just saying they have bad education. They're uncivilized.
Well, in a sense, but they weren't claiming kind of publicly that they were connected, even though Caesar himself knew that they were, and he said it in his own works that we're trying to take over the land that Brutus went to, because he saw it as Brutus is one of our descendants, so therefore these lands are technically Roman already. Because he's one of us. He went over there, so now we've got to go and conquer them, and they're just us who are just uneducated. But the thing is what people don't realize is Caesar actually failed. He invaded twice, and both times he got sent back. And he writes, they're uneducated brutes. But he failed his invasion, and he got sent out of the country twice. It wasn't until 100 or so years later that the Romans actually successfully invaded the south of England and then slowly moved from there. So Caesar himself, he never got anywhere. And that's because there was this British history and this British Empire that was started, Londinium, as they might call it, was New Troy. And it was a big city, big castle. And they couldn't get anywhere. They couldn't cross the river. There's loads of info that you can read about it. It's actually quite interesting. And they talk about the battles, how the British had placed wooden stakes in the crossings of the river, so the Romans rode their horses across the river, and their horses are getting staked. And then suddenly the British all emerge from the other side and ambush them.
This is the most interesting wiki article ever, because it doesn't have like the woke debunking section that's like none of this is true and that we've decided that anyone who believes this is a white supremacist.
It's because they can't. Well, the thing is, it's not accepted as official history.
No, it's a medieval legend. Okay, go back.
Well, it used to be until I can't remember the exact point where they threw all of this out. But originally, if you go back to one of the oldest British documents, which is written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, that's from the 1100s, and that obviously lists us as being descendants of Brutus and etc. Coming from the Trojans. Well, at some point, this legend disappears, and they said, well, it's because Troy was a myth. They said Troy was a myth. It was just something that was conjured up in the mind of Homer. So, it wasn't real. Therefore, all of British history must also, of that is a myth. But then they found Troy in whatever year, the 1800s. They found Troy, but at that point, they didn't go back and say, oh, British history must be real. They just, as people say, they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and at that point, it was too late to go and get the baby back.
Brutal, man. That's like so the entirety of British history is connected then to an offshoot of Etruscan society or in Gaelic and Etruscan society that like it went off there basically at some
Yeah,
point.
I
But
mean,
did
you
they
can
conquer
use
the Picts, or who were there already indigenous? Because people talk about the
well,
brown skinned people that lived in England, right? Like
the Picts, as far as we know, are originally a Scythian tribe that were sailing across the North Sea. They landed in Scotland, and apparently they were just allowed to settle, and then they just grew from there. That's who the Picts were.
but not very
They
tall, right? Like weren't they short and like aren't they like a small group of
The
people?
Picts are usually the ones that are just painted blue and stuff
I
like
thought
that.
that the Picts were
No,
brown and then that they got eaten by the Celts and the Celts were dyeing their skin blue. It's the Picts that started with blue.
No, not really. I mean, the thing is with the Celts, right, is there's a lot of confusion about Celtic tribes because British people weren't called Celtic until 1714. Then it suddenly kind of appeared that British people were Celtic, they were connected to these tribes, etc. But the evidence would actually suggest that they're not Celtic. They came from the same places, like you say, as the Etruscans, and that they were probably warring with the Celts as much as the Etruscans were. Whether or not Celts were in the country beforehand, possibly, but as I mentioned earlier, there was an Assyrian migration in 1600s, so maybe that's where you come across the dark-skinned Druids, or what you might think of Celts, is possibly because we had an Assyrian, which is Chaldean, migration in 1600 BC. There's evidence that there was mines in Britain that were being used by the Assyrians. So if you imagine where Chaldea is, Assyria, they were sailing their boats to Britain, had their own groups there, mining stuff, and possibly taking it back.
Dude, well, if you had blue people, I mean, that's pretty sweet. You gotta admit.
Pretty Avatar, isn't it? But
Yeah.
their weaponry as well is very Scythian. You'll
Very
see
Hindu
sometimes.
also, like the Hindus with the mustaches. Like you've seen all the pictures of like it seems to me also like kind of interesting.
Well, yeah, you got to remember that Scythia in itself is quite a broad term because you've got in Scythian tribes you can have Huns and Goths, which would definitely be considered more East Asian. Coming from the Xianbei kind of Xiongnu kind of tribes of north of China, whereas the Alans are also considered Scythian and they are completely Iranian. So saying Scythian in itself could just constitute so much because it could mean Genghis Khan or Attila the Hun, or it could mean an Iranian person, and they're different. You know what I mean? So you have this Turkic element, which is very different from that East Asian Mongolic element, which could both be described as Scythian accurately. And then when you have the Saxon and the Angles and everything that have moved into North Europe in around just before the Huns have moved in, you've had the Saxons and all them move in, so they're Scythian as well. Then the Huns have come flying over and they've gone, right, fuck, jump over the water. Right, and that's essentially what's happened there. But even if you look at, I think it's Hengist, but one of them in particular, his name is escaping me, it might not be Hengist, but he sent back messages to Scythia to send for more Saxons because there was a civil war going on in Britain at the time, and the king in the south of Britain was like, hey, you guys are pretty good at fighting, could you get some more? And they were like, yeah, we'll send messages back to Scythia. And obviously the historians have to say, oh, well, by Scythia they meant Germany, and that's where a lot of the stuff comes from.
But
Because
wherever the wherever Saint Germain was going to, or wherever that region, because like it's such an ambiguous term at that point, what we call Scythia
well, yeah, because it's
or
so
Scythian or German or like
you've got to remember as well that, I mean,
oh,
supposedly
John made it.
the Romans and Greeks supposedly called anything north of their empire kind of Scythia. That's what they say. So anything beyond Trias in Germany. So obviously, remember the Roman Empire did extend into Germany. I don't know if you've got a map of that, but you can see Trias. It was considered like the third capital of the Roman
We
Empire.
want map of Germany. By the way, Sean Morris is here. He just got back from the 10th century France time. He had a fight in the Anglo-Saxon timeline war, like that movie timeline.
Yeah, but I don't remember any of it because my memory is remeshed with my current self 5 minutes
Yeah.
after I got back here. So
Only the government of
That's
Russia
like me
gets
every
to
time I
know.
do DMT, so I understand.
Hey, wow,
yeah.
Gleb made it too. So I've been really wanting to get Gleb on the show at some point, along with Luke, because Gleb's
Hi guys.
Are you in St.
Nice to
Petersburg
meet
right
you.
now? Are you in St. Petersburg? Where are you at?
I'm in St. Petersburg. In St.
Man, I can't believe
Petersburg.
the internet works at all.
I'm on. Yeah,
There'll
you
be
can
some
hear me.
glitches probably. Yeah, sometimes it's coming in and out sometimes, but yeah. But yeah, we were talking a bit about the Scythians, and the idea kind of oh, there's some brutal feedback. I'm gonna mute you for a second just while the feedback happens. Oh wait, no, is that not you? Yeah, that's cool. All right, talking about the Scythians, right? Because the Russian, German, Celtic, nomadic period, and talking about the Rus, right? Because the Etruscans, the idea that the Etruscans weren't the Roman people, but they were the Rus probably, because like the Etar Ruskin before they were conquered, and you've got all these examples of Slavonian Gaelic art that's the same across the Mediterranean into the Balkan into Russia, right? Like all the way, and this is the third the third Roman city is Moscow because it stores the remnants after everything is conquered in Middle Christianity, right? So like the last kind of authentic look at it we have.
I would say that it's possible that there's a connection via the tribes of Israel, because we know that the tribes of Gog Magog were supposedly sent over the Caucasus north, which would be into Russia. We've also got evidence of the Kimmeroi, definitely in those areas. And like I said, the tribes of Israel themselves had probably kind of intermingled with the Trojans in Anatolia. So you would have had that mix of those communities happening in Turkey, definitely before the Trojan War. And then once the Trojan Wars happened, at those communities have split. So it's possible that some have gone north and taken the exact same art and language and stuff north, and then they've also sailed to Italy, taken it to there, and then taken it to Britain. Like, we can actually trace this language to Egypt itself. You can use, there's a book, a great book, which shows how you can use the Welsh language as it is today to translate Egyptian hieroglyphs. And that's because the Welsh language itself is a remnant of this Colbran, and Colbran's a remnant of Etruscan, and Etruscan obviously is connected. And you can actually use this same Colbran alphabet to translate Etruscan texts. So yeah, that's the
doesn't
book.
Welsh have a similar root to that some Indian language? Because they're both like they're essentially like both split in different directions off of some sort of like Proto-Aryan or something like that.
It's very possible, but I mean, I think the Aryans would technically be considered before this, but you'd have to speak to someone that's more of an expert on this. Unfortunately, the person who wrote that book has passed away, and the original people that realized this also passed away because they're quite old. But if you get this book, it's absolutely brilliant. It shows you how this Welsh is connected, and like I say, it's a descendant of this thing called Colbran. So if you look up Coelbren, Colbran language, they say it's a fake. But it's definitely not. We've got evidence of it in America. Do it with COEL. Yeah, here we go. So they say that this dude forged it, called Yolo Morgan. They say he forged it, but it's not a forgery. This is a real alphabet. That sign there that you can see, which is like a triangle, it's called the Arwen. It's, if you go there, you go, it's in the middle. You see the Arwen, symbol of inspiration. It's kind of like a secret symbol for God. So these guys are definitely related to the tribes of Israel. This language came over from that area with these people, and it definitely comes from Egyptian. So you can trace the route that they've come from Egypt with the groups that have left with the Exodus. They've gone back to where they've gone. They've gone into capture under Salamanca and all that with the Assyrians. They've left. They've gone on their journeys, and some of them have ended up in Wales. And you can follow that language. It's absolutely brilliant.
Crazy. Also, Gleb, where you at? You're walking around St. Petersburg right now. What are you showing us?
I'm glad to meet you. but some person
I like the
see
idea
my
of the morning in
face
Russia.
now.
Late night.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
that's good. You see this one, classical subject. So actually used to be the
Oh, it's like a baptism. Is it like a baptism, like a holy
single
water,
piece.
holy water fountain or
No,
something?
this one is for. It used to be this guy. The owner of this house was the main guy from of the Knights or Tsar division
Oh.
of the Knights, and it was in eight something in the beginning.
It's legit.
80s. So, and he.
Oh man, we're gonna have to get you better Wi-Fi.
Language. Sorry, I was outside.
If they don't have 5G in St. Petersburg.
Yeah, they might not have 5G, but they do have Tartarian
luck
monuments
next time,
every
interesting.
5 feet. Yeah, it looks cool. I mean, it's crazy all the stuff that's going on in
it's
St.
3D.
Petersburg in terms of Tartarian architecture.
It's palace, everything. Sasha.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, JP, you were about to say
All
something
right,
too. You
I
were
have to
talking.
go. Maybe I.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm stoked that we got to see St. Petersburg at night. Yeah, let's do this again soon. Peace, Gleb. Yeah, Gleb's cool. I'm sorry that we didn't have 5G because it would have been sweet to have him walking around St. Petersburg, because sometimes he'll walk into like cathedrals and like the buildings and go down the stairs and stuff. So we get to see a lot of the different architecture in Russia, which is pretty sweet.
We should try, if he's going to be doing a walking tour, maybe like set it up so you see if there's like an internet connection consistently around the path he's going to be going.
Yeah, I want to get Luke and him to talk about Russia. I think that'll be important. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, now that the St. Petersburg syndicate is not on the stream, at least we don't have to watch what we say about Russia anymore. So he doesn't just like disappear.
No, you can say.
No, you still got Andreas, man. He's still gonna monitor you.
We can still talk about Russia. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, exactly. I think the deal is.
I mean, I could. I could drive around a bit later, so we could just take a look on the.
That'd be cool. Yeah. All right, let's do it. Sweet.
On the river, and it's a very.
All right.
Interesting.
We'll have to talk about
inhabited, because the narrative says 17 isn't like nothing to do with it, because you can see this everywhere.
We'll have to get better Wi-Fi. That'll be like the thing, but this is not bad. I can see, yeah, all the basements, everything is built up to that level. Oh, he just disappeared. But yeah, we'll talk with him more at some point. You can talk about Russia. Talk about Russia. Last time we talked about, one of the reasons I wanted to get him on was because Luke had all these opinions about Russia, and it was really funny because Luke will go for an hour.
It's really obvious that the origin of the Russian people is they're a bunch of Greeks that left the beach to go into the mountains. Either they did it willingly.
A lot of Russians believe that. That's like an official narrative.
There's a lot of evidence in their culture. First of all, take a look at Vladimir Putin. Give the guy a tan and a Hawaiian T-shirt, and imagine him explaining that he's opening up his third gyro restaurant in a very thick Greek accent. He's obviously a Greek who hasn't seen the sun in years. All right. Second of all, you take a look at the letter they use for P. All right. Like that's obviously pi. Third of all, the tradition of military homosexuality.
Yeah, that's true. That actually. But the Germans do that too, and the Germans
Spartan love, as they call it.
The Germans aren't Greek. The Germans are Turkish. So I don't know. I mean, like
the Germans are Slavs.
Well, I mean, not in the military. I mean, Ernst wrong.
Yeah, don't tell them that. But yeah.
No,
it's
I
like
mean,
telling an Israeli they have the same DNA as a Palestinian, but they do.
Well, this is what I mean. If you go into German World War II stuff, they were pretty proud of, obviously, German nationalism, but they were proud of being Huns. They were proud of being Teutonic Knights. That was their thing. Like, come on, you're the descendants of these great invaders. You took down the Roman Empire. You were crusading.
They were invited into the Roman Empire, and that's how they took it down.
They were Romans. Yeah, that's the thing. They were Roman citizens. Most of them are just the remnants of Roman settlements on top of old Germany. Like all of Germany is built on these church towns. Church towns are built on old Diana and Apollo temple sites all over the place. You've got crypts underneath the churches. I mean, the entire Middle Ages wouldn't have been plausible if it weren't for the fact that people were building their villages on top of aqueducts, on top of old cisterns, and on top of the wells, and the plumbing systems that the Romans had left them.
It's
that they were
insane
living
when
on
you
top
think
of.
about it. The Middle Ages was literally built on the ruins of a previous civilization, and they had no understanding of it at all, almost.
And
That's
the,
a good
the
point.
Christian church made a specific point as well of building all their churches on top of the pagan sites.
Yeah,
Because that's the
They
point.
also
We're
adopted a lot of
replacing-
pagan traditions.
Well,
But-
yeah, that's part of the indoctrinating those people into your system. If you replace their church, you've got to bring them in, haven't you? By being like, oh no, it's still the sun god. Don't worry, it's still the sun god.
It's
The
just like your
is
god is now
son,
an angel
son of the
under
god.
ours.
It's the same
Yeah.
idea. But
Yeah,
That's
which
why
is
satanic
earlier, I just
religion
wanted
and monotheism in general it's like the first form of globalism.
Wait,
Like,
before-
you took the
before we
Romans, brought them
lambast-
into the fold, took the Egyptians,
we-
brought them into the fold.
before we lambast Atonism and Akhenaten, Akhenaten, let's talk a second about Luke's transgressions against humanity and his own hypocrisy, because I find him adorable.
Luke
Last
our friend
time-
or Luke the writer?
Luke here on the show, Ancient Historia. Last time we were on the
Oh.
show, yeah, 'cause
I didn't
he's
know
a-
your name. Sorry.
He's a decent bloke. Last time we were on the show, and this is what most of my friends will do about their lives. They'll talk about how much they'll criticize for an hour their own country and all the problems. Very good. Talk about all the issues with it. And then we'll get into another country and it's just like, oh, but that color's purple. You know what I mean? So like Russia, for you to be like, I hate what's going on in England, all this stuff. And then, but like all of a sudden it's like, but Russia's so bad and Putin's so bad. And then it seems like you're falling on the sword of British Atlanticism is the solution to defeat Russia, right? Like that. Like, so how are you picking that side? Just because you're English, or what's the deal with that?
Well, I mean, first off, I'd say you're taking 2 points that are unconnected. I could complain about I can complain about my living conditions, and that doesn't mean that your living conditions are better or worse. They're unconnected. They're different things. So by me complaining about Britain, that doesn't have any contrast or any kind of element on what I'm talking about when it comes to Russia. And the only thing that I've talked about when it comes to Russia, or what I did talk about on your channel last time, was their possible motivations for why they might have manipulated this Tartarian narrative to suit their needs, which is what I went into. I discussed how it would benefit them in Moscow to keep the people in the east, in Siberia, thinking, oh, we were all one nation forever. We were always one giant nation. It was never us, the kingdom of Siberia. It was always the kingdom of Russia. And that's good for them, because guess where most of Russia's soldiers come from the uneducated east. Most of the populous, educated west who live in Moscow and these regions, they're all fine. They're enjoying it. But the people that are dying in Ukraine are coming from these poor regions, and most of them are Muslim. So I noticed that a lot of the stuff, for example, you can look at David Ewing Jr.'s work, it's consolidating this Muslim element, bringing them in and saying, no, the Quran talks about it too. Don't worry. We all had this, and that
it's
was
a
why I
new
was
world
getting it.
order optics agenda, but it's for everybody. It's definitely
Yeah,
not
I never
Russia.
discussed the specifics of Russia and how people are living in Russia. I just talked about why the Tartarian narrative might have been manipulated to turn it into what it is.
Well, I mean, in a
to
sense, you're not
benefit
wrong,
certain people.
because Russia's definitely using the Tartaria. We've talked about how they're educating their kids. This guy Gleb is walking around St. Petersburg showing off all the buildings that he finds to be Tartarian looking. So clearly there's like a consciousness of Tartaria going on there. The difference is Moscow's not saying that they're the originator of Tartaria. They're saying that they're the inheritor, because no one else has stepped up to the plate to inherit Tartaria. And so all of the groups that are interested in a world alliance, a confederated kingdoms ship where everyone where Siberia is a kingdom and Bolivia is a kingdom, but they're all part of Tartaria. Who's looking for that, right? Moscow's the only place that seems to say, hey, we acknowledge that this is something that we could work towards again, right? And not everyone else is doing that. So, of course, Siberia is going to say, yeah, well, we should work with Moscow, even though Moscow admits that the origin would have been in Kyiv or in, Georgia,
Wouldn't that be akin to like if the United States had a lot of a heavier Native American element, and they were kind of starting to say like, oh, well, this country is like the same thing that's been going on
isn't
for 5,000,
it already
10,000 years?
Isn't already what we're doing with the Greek and Roman continuation? America's like, well, we're the natural continuation of Greek democracy. Are we?
What I would answer to what you just said is that Tartaria was never one giant country. If you were to actually
Right.
take the country of Tartaria itself, it was definitely more around Mongolia. There's a debate over whether it extended up the Northern Ocean, but that could be down to the European cartographers having absolutely no knowledge of the Northeast and thinking that
Right.
everything beyond Lake Baikal was the Scythian Ocean.
Totally
right?
reasonable.
So
conclusion.
the point that I'm making is that whilst you have a Tartarian empire, which we would today consider the Mongol Empire, which splintered into the different, Golden Horde, Chagatai, Ilkhanate, Northern Wan, etc. Kublai Khan obviously took China during his period of the Golden. So you can consider all that Tartaria. But what you were saying about splitting things up, during Tartaria, even in Fomenko's model, there was a Tsar of Siberia. So even in Fomenko's model, there was a ruler of Siberia who had just as much power, supposedly, as the Tsar in Moscow. So even in that model, Siberia has a say. And that was what I was getting at. The current model is basically tricking people who don't have, because you got to remember, Siberia's history was destroyed. As far as we know, in the official history, it was destroyed during a campaign of destruction from the 1500s to about the 1800s. They moved across. They destroyed the Cyber Khanate in 1586. They replaced it with Tobolsk. They moved their own people. They captured the Sibursky family, which was the Cyber royal family. They moved them to Moscow, and that created the House of Siberia. They were basically imprisoned in Moscow and said, stay here. You can't go anywhere. You can't be kings of your own place. And that's why, if you look at Pugachev's rebellion, this is a dude from Siberia, from the east, who thinks himself the rightful heir to the throne. And Fomenko turns this and says that Pugachev's rebellion is, part of this Romanov kind of expansionist thing. Whereas if you apply it to actually the history as we know, you could say, well, maybe Pugachev was a descendant of this Cyber Khanate who thinks, wait a minute, I should be king of this whole area. And that's how they've twisted the history, because they don't want the Siberian people to know that they had their own history. Tumen in Siberia is one of the oldest cities in the whole of Russia. They have their own history. Go to Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. They have thousands of years of history, and it was all destroyed when a Russian fort replaced it in the 16 to 1700s. And you've got the same story across that entire front, right? If you go to any of these cities, when does it say the history started? 16 to 1700s. When? Because a Russian fort was built there. But everything before the Russian fort appeared is gone. Everything before that, no, there's nothing here. But Russian fort appears in the 1600s, country founded. Do you get what I mean? You're muted, Andreas.
Yeah, I get that. There's definitely an erasure of the world culture. And it gets worse under the 20th century, right? With Stalinism, you have but also you have a kind of a benefit, because Siberia is refilled with all of the disenfranchised, all the people that were intellectuals that Stalin was worried about. He's like, well, I don't know what we'll do with intellectuals. Just put them in Siberia. So Siberia did end up like Silicon Forest, all of the major tech out of Russia, not all of it, but a lot of the major tech out of Russia comes from the Silicon Forest, which is in Siberia and Novosibirsk. So they do have, they're doing all right. Like in terms of of Russia, Novosibirsk is probably one of the nicest places to live, and St. Petersburg clearly looks pretty good. So
Russia itself, though, is more of a federation than it is a country, kind of like more akin to the United States. Each region is like an oblast, and then each oblast has like those different administrative districts that are actually, I think, more like sized like United States. It's almost like a collection of countries and cultures that have all come together and just said, we're going to operate under this common banner. And they do, as far as I understand, maintain some sort of independence between each other.
To an extent, there's rules still. So what's sad is all right, so they've taken the worst ideas from us. So starting with the Soviet Union had a really amazing constitution. It doesn't mean that they followed
Did they take the idea from us? Because they've been doing this a lot longer.
So the Soviet Constitution is almost identical to the United States Constitution. It just has more rights in it. They just never enforced them. But there were these ideas of more rights that were written directly into it because it was supplemental. This is written after ours, but also federalism. So we were a confederated country, and the Soviets were more like confederations. And eventually they realized that's not going to work by especially in the 60s. But during Stalin's period, he controlled each oblast and said, this is going to be for military purposes. This whole city is going to be building these kinds of things. And you're not allowed to talk to anybody or leave. And
Well, that's
that
central planning.
central planning led to closed cities, which today there are still in Russia and the Russian Federation, closed cities where you can't just go from one place in Russia to another place in Russia without a visa. You
Like
know,
to
so
Bot 7.
like if I wanted to go from like San Francisco to Los Angeles, I might need a visa. Not necessarily because it's not that bad to go from St. Petersburg to Moscow, but in general, if I were to try to go to Novosibirsk to Silicon Forest, it's I think still a closed city that you need to have permission to be in that city. So there's a lot of examples of that for military cities in Russia and a lot of places which were not on the map until satellite positioning, and now they're on the map. And they're like, yeah, they exist, just don't ever come here.
You
Right.
got to remember as
Yeah,
well
because nobody else knew about them.
Oh, sorry, man. But the Soviet Union did do a lot of the damage in terms of history. We don't actually know what was destroyed before, what was destroyed after. Everyone brings up that CIA document that mentions Tartaria, but it is actually a great example of what they were doing, because when they came into power, one of the things that they did was they motivated the Muslim population, and they were saying to the Muslim population, look, we're on your side. Yeah, we're atheists, but you're okay. You know what I mean? We're not going to do anything to you. The minute they got into power, stuff started to change. And eventually, especially when it came up to World War II, they were essentially doing their own version of the Holocaust on the Muslim people. And
Yeah, I
that
wouldn't expect them to treat Islam any different than Christianity as
well,
Russians.
for real, it's never talked about, but the stuff that was going on with those people is ridiculous. And they completely erased what is most of Central Asian history, from what was originally the Khanate of Bukhara, Khanate of Kokand, Khanate of Khiva. These are all places which were considered independent Tartary before the Russians invaded in about 1850s. They'd been trying since the 1700s, but they finally got finished it in about 1860, 1870 or something.
Is the concept of Russianness a nationality, or is it an allegiance, though?
Well, at this point, I'd say it's an allegiance.
There is a Russian nationality, but there's also an allegiance for the Federation in the same way that America is a federation. But Russia there was less of a Russian allegiance before the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union did create an ideology, which is, the nation of hip hop, the nation of communism. Like anyone can be a communist, right?
Right, but like the Russian Federation itself goes all the way back to like the 1500s.
But it wasn't. Yeah, but it doesn't include a lot of the states that today would consider themselves Russian.
So this kind of reminds me of that. It's not entirely. I mean, of course, we have a lot more freedom here. This is just when it comes to air travel. But this was supposed to go into effect like 2 years ago, but the pandemic pushed it back.
Really? And what was this exactly? Is this a real ID thing?
So this is, you basically have to go get a passport connected to your driver's license. I think that this kind of went over a lot of people, and a lot of people aren't ready for this. This is something that was done legally a decade ago, kind of quietly.
Explain. What did they do?
Well, you can't get on a plane
without a chip in your passport.
Well, yeah, after
you get on a plane without an ID, period, unless you're an illegal immigrant.
In this case, they're not giving you a choice to track your analytical.
So what happens if I own my own plane, though? Right? Like, can't you do anything if you have your own private jet? Like,
no, you still have to go through TSA. I've been on private charters before.
Bummer.
It's a lot faster. There's no line.
Yeah,
you're on your own airline essentially.
Yeah.
Interesting. Still, the idea that you have to go through TSA, I don't know. Well, I mean, the idea of like security in Russia is interesting because a federation is different than a confederation, and that's caused a lot of problems. For instance,
it seems like they're going to do this with planes first. I mean, what's to stop them from trains and buses and cabs? And
well, like I just meant like example like Tatarstan, which we've interviewed.
Have the new license just to drive a car,
We've interviewed people from Tatarstan.
Yeah,
well,
basically.
That's already happening if you have a fruit.
That would suck, right?
Tatarstan's cool, and it's a state in Russian Federation that really is its own country, right? And these are the examples, like how much are you going to be allowed to be your own culture? And it looks like Tatarstan has rebound a lot, to be this is where a lot of this culture comes from, right? Like this
idea, Basque country.
It is really beautiful. Yeah, and you can see like the Slavic culture. Tartarstan's amazing, but it's a state in the Russian Federation. So some would say they'd prefer to be a country, and like a lot of you ask a Tartar, they're going to say, "I'm not a Russian. I'm a Tartar. I'm not from Russia. I'm from Tartarstan." So
Yeah,
they don't look at themselves as Russian, even though that they're happily part of the Russian Federation, right?
to go back to something I was going to bring it up, but you guys started talking, so I tried to mentally note it, and it's only just come back to me, so it might be a bit late. But when we're talking about Siberia, if you go to the documents around about the time of the invasion of the Russians, some of them do suggest that the Khanate of Siberia was still under the yoke of the Sham of Cathay. Now, Cathay, of course, referring to not China, it's being like the remnants of the Khitan Empire, which I would consider Manchuria before they changed themselves to the Qing dynasty. And well, they became the Manchus officially, but they were the later Jin, became the king. But that area was called Cathay because obviously the Khitan Empire is Cathay. That's why, in fact, Russia has the Kitay-Gorod Wall in Moscow because, well, it's kind of weird, but it means Chinatown. But yeah, so there's a lot of evidence that might suggest that the empire itself was situated in Manchuria, and there was a second Sham, and that was the guy that was actually ruling Siberia and stuff, kind of as vassal states. So that would definitely be a reason for the kind of Fomenko mindset to move it to Russia instead, because they like to say that all that area was just part of the Mongol.
No, because it's not about where the area is necessarily, because there are people that live there and eventually they want it back, but really it's about a nomadic people. And if they lived in Manchuria, there's a plague, there's a war, and they move west, they're still the same people. Like it's as if a lot of Israel was created out of London and New York, right? So it's similarly, people don't have to be from or in the place that they're trying to go back to, like their culture or that they want, right? Because
Russia's been relocating people from one land to another for God knows how long.
Yeah, definitely. The deportations, deportations are not deportations. Deportations are definitely something that has come up in history.
They have another Trail of Tears every 20 years over there.
100%. I mean, you even go to the Crimean War, that's definitely a dodgy one, but basically the entirety of Europe teamed up to help the Tatars against Russia in that one. 1783, but I might be wrong on that.
So they're nomadic, right? They're moving around. Their capital is obviously mobile, correct?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it seems like that's what the tabernacle represents. Every picture you see of Tartaria, they're using tents, these giant.
What happens when somebody wants to settle down and say, "This is where all of our people are going to capitalize on this nation idea from now on"?
Why would you do that?
Sorry, the official.
The better thing to do.
I was going to say it was 1853 for the actual full-on Crimean War. 1783 was like earlier battle, but the main point of that kind of issue is that Russia at that point was expanding everywhere. I think everyone was worried about this because Russia had grown so large. They were moving into Central Asia. I remember the Afghans were making a lot of deals because obviously Britain at that point owned Afghanistan, and a lot of the Afghans were okay to join forces with the British because they saw the Russians coming and they were like, "Oh yeah, go on then. We'll actually allow the British to take over just to stop the Russians," kind of thing. And I think it just shows that it's like the South Park episode, isn't it, where you say we've got a choice between a turd and a douche. Like that's essentially the choices of all these people. You've got the British on one side absolutely plundering Afghanistan and India, and then on the other side you've got the Russians doing the exact same, and you think, which one do I choose?
It's pretty much the situation we're still in today, honestly. Like we've got Russia trying to expand westward.
That's kind of the point I was trying to get to.
But it's supposed to be a good thing. You're supposed to have two empires that confederate. You've got a land and sea power. The sea power does trade between the land power. The land power sets up port cities. The port cities are interacting with the sea power and the land power. And then you've got, the land power has nomadic tabernacles. The sea power has nomadic sea vessels, right? Like you've got.
It almost feels like there's three empires struggling against each other in the current world, though.
We the people? Because what? Who's the third?
The old Roman Empire doesn't seem to hold the United States, I feel. Like the traditions of the Roman Empire are alive and well in places like Spain and Latin America, where they have things like inquisitory court systems where the judge actually picks through all the evidence and decides whether or not you're guilty. In the United States, we have an adversarial court system. It's based on British common law, and a lot of countries in the world are following that example rather than the Roman example, where, you know, like if you were to be accused of a crime, you'd have a prosecutor and a jury rather than the judge just looking through everything, deciding whether or not you're guilty. There's a lot of big differences between Roman systems and British common law systems. So they might be aligned right now, but how long will something like that last? And if you look, most of the Latin influenced countries, including Southern Europe, follow that model.
I think that you're correct in the sense that the model's not going to last because information is so clearly recorded. And that
I also don't think it's that different.
That, you know, they do have court like that. You know, what is it? The magistrate courts do that.
Yeah,
Right.
but
And
like,
also you
culturally
have to think
speaking,
about
do we know which side Latin America is going to fall on the in the future?
I would say all of America is kind of a thing, first off, and then all of Roman culture and all of Arabic culture are not a thing. They're not like monolithic. So Roman culture had different states that had different rules, even though they had a Roman imperial system, and you had different rights for different classes of people, including people that were from different conscripted countries or they'd given up their rights to become citizens. You also have the Roman Empire becoming the Holy Roman Empire, which is a completely different thing. But before that, you have the Arabic thing, and the Arabic thing is a kind of Sharia law system. But in Spain, they developed what really Napoleonic law is based on, because Napoleonic law is saying, well, we have to have everything written down, we have to have order. Well, Maimonides did that first, so there already was this idea of statutes in Arabic law that we became very familiar with, and that led to the European.
Hammurabi did that first.
Well, that's fair. You could say Babylonians, but the point is the Arabs brought it to Europe. The Arabs brought it to Europe, and then afterwards.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask how long we're going to go for. Just
you want to do another hour? Is that good?
Well, I was just because I might stream it to my audience if we're going to do
it.
it.
Yeah, do it. Good. How could you not stream?
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to know.
How dare you? British man. No,
should we all just pretend like we've just started?
I just don't want to say that we're in a dichotomous world where there's only two things: Russia versus everyone else, because there's the Russian Empire, the British Empire, the Roman Empire, and the Arabic Empire. And yes, the Arabic Empire is multifaceted and decentralized, and just essentially
streaming before the hour begins, because that'll be really cool. Because then that can be like,
I will.
Yeah. Okay, so the Russian.
What should I call this? Give me a
I've been calling it the Xirtus early birds and goals. Is what I called it. But you can call it whatever you want. You can call it like how Russia's cool. You can say how like British people are learning to be more like Russians. I don't care. Whatever.
Okay.
But I think that's what this whole Ukrainian
99 ways the Welsh get laid.
I think the Ukrainian war is really about preventing Russian expansion westward, because they really would love to make everything all the way up to the west coast of Europe a Russian oblast or two.
Wait, hold on. Okay, we didn't get there yet. So the Arabs had their law system, which is very much where the Napoleonic law system came, but also they had their
and which
Sharia
one of these law systems
court.
you'd like to live under really does affect your quality and style.
We haven't even got it. So we had that Roman law system, right? But now we have this Arabic law system, and we haven't gotten to the Napoleonic law system yet. First, we have to have the Holy Roman Empire's law system. The Holy Roman Empire's Catholic law system is based on the Sharia law system, right? Because it's using this idea of Sharia and God's law, and you can't always know all the law. So we have all of those simultaneously that are existing. And in Latin America to North America, you have corporatism, fascism, Bolivarianism, you have Bolivarian socialism. And yeah, I think corporatism leads to Romanism. So you have a Roman. You think streaming? Cool. All right, hold on. Watching Ancient Historia. This is Luke's stream, brought to you from America. Okay, we're good.
Surprise.
Yeah, so law system. So yeah, I think the other thing to understand is America exists as a collection of states, and this really began after in the 19th century, late 19th century, after we invaded the Philippines, and we realized we should just have a bunch of countries that we own, right? And
wait, our law system started in the year 1000 with the Magna Carta.
Okay, but if you say that, then their law system is really weird, because we have social contract theory, which states that between two mutually agreeing parties, you can make
Mhm.
an agreement. So the Magna Carta is at gunpoint, a man is forced to surrender his rights without any sort of agreement, right? He's forced to do this thing. It's not two mutually agreeing parties.
Yeah, if you
Right.
want to exist here, you have to consent to be governed by us.
Right. So the Magna Carta isn't, I mean, either it is or it isn't like the most important like
We can get into
document.
anarchic philosophy, but I prefer to live among a population that is governed.
Why?
Why? Because then I can predict what people are going to do. It's not random. You can't
It
have
isn't-
business without predictability.
I don't know. So like I feel like in Japan, in the movies at least, when in the 16th century, like they kill each other with swords, you know, like the Edo period, to the 18th century, they're so much more polite to each other because there's that potential that they could get stabbed. You know what I mean?
It's nice to be
Yeah,
rude
right,
sometimes. You know
right
what I
up
mean?
to the
Sometimes you
point
like
where
to-
they were introduced to firearms.
Yeah, right up to the point.
Come on, with
Okay.
somebody who honks at you, you don't look at him and say, "Your horn blows," but does your mother?
Right.
People
Well,
look
that's
at you,
another
yeah,
thing.
so it's
After
So
that,
that's-
it took all of 40 years, and their honor was gone.
That's another interesting point. So you'd think that in New York City, where you have lots of people interacting with each other all the time and people get murdered all the time, that people would become hyper civilized because they would become more British than British, trying to be polite to each other to not get killed. Why is it that it works the opposite?
no. I don't think that people in New York would become polite with each other just because the culture exists not to be. You couldn't just hand them all swords and expect them to all be perfect angels. That would be insane.
No, but like if everyone started murdering each other, wouldn't you try being more polite to not get murdered? It just seems like Yeah,
No, I
maybe,
think
or I
that
would
you
just not
become
go there.
stronger to not get murdered and be able to murder other people faster. I mean, that seems like the
I think you'd be
survival
able-
of humans.
I think you'd be able to run a countryside like that. Maybe not a city.
we have a double Historia. Oh, okay. I was like, whoa, there's two ancient Historias, but it's your screen. Tell me about this. You're muted, dog, on your own channel.
Oh no.
I did not just do that. Anyway, yeah, this is just because I need money at the moment. You know, Ancient Historia needs to upgrade to Super Historia.
Oh yeah, so
And,
give him some British
um,
pounds for this map archive. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So basically, I thought like instead of just ask for money, which I could usually do, I thought I could offer something in return. So this is my entire Tartaria map archive. Some of them, most of them, are in such high quality that you can zoom in to a man on the ground. Maybe not that high quality, but close enough, and they're absolutely amazing. So if you're a Tartaria person that wants to either research more or you want to start your own channel or something, you know, this is the go-to, because this will take you hundreds of hours, if not thousands, to find all these different ones. So if this is something you're interested in, definitely think about hitting out, because you're going to support the channel and you're going to get access to a gigantic archive. So consider that.
Aren't we all a little Tartarian in a way? Like I found out that I recently found out that I've got a little bit of Basque Arab DNA in my blood, and I feel like that is connected to that if I remember correctly, right?
The Basque are based. They're no one knows exactly where they come from, but their grammar is identical to the Japanese grammar, which is really weird. Yeah, but the Basque are cool, and like I love Basque country. When I went to Spain, I walked across France into Spain, and so I had to walk through Basque country through the Pyrenees. And there's this old book, The Song of Roland, about the Arabs and the Christians at that time, because Spain, you know, they're Muslim and Christian, and they're crossing the Pyrenees mountains at night with ponies, wild ponies. And now today, I was in 2012, 16 different years. There are still wild ponies. They're just lost in the mountains because they were just abandoned, and they've like evolved to be all hairy and crazy and cool. But the Christian peasants and the Muslim peasants would work with each other to cross, because the Knights Templar, the elite, and the Ottomans, the elite of the Arabs, were working together to tax and exploit the peasants on both sides. So it's an interesting story, because you're looking at it thinking like, oh, this is, especially in the 12th century, it's supposed to be a story about Christians versus Muslims and this, you know, religious war. And really, it's the story of peasants working together on both sides of this ambiguous religious argument between, it's like Animal Farm. Like, you can't tell the difference between the pigs and the men, you know?
Is that, and then I guess that all of that is the reason my beard is so thick.
Could be a thing. Also, Basques have really good food, like really good food. They excel at that. But their language, dude, super weird. Like, people need to study the Basque language a lot more. Do you think that they're connected to the Welsh? Do you think that's what's going on, Luke?
Well, actually, now that you've talked about it, yeah, they actually some of them are. During the migrations of Brutus, they supposedly stopped off in that region to pick
Oh.
up some of their fellow tribesmen that had been there from earlier migrations. So it would suggest that there's a connection. You've also got to remember that if you bring up kind of the Gothic, Visigothic Empire in Europe, you'll see that there is a big center in Portugal, Spain, Lower France, but essentially loads of the Goths and the Vandals and loads of other Scythian tribes ended up in Spain. There was migrations over the Pillars of Hercules into Morocco and stuff like that. So yeah, 100% there's a connection there,
Sometimes it feels
particularly
like
between the North
these
African.
Sometimes it
Sorry.
feels like these small nomadic tribes that, went all over the place with their own little plans had more of an effect on history than the people sitting on the thrones.
Well, I mean, they call them small tribes, but this is the thing. If you go back to, I think it's Honorius and Arcadius, the emperors a certain period, they both had generals that were their advisors, but they were more than advisors. They were quite literally the people that told them what to do. And one of them was Visigothic, and I think the other was a Vandal. So Honorius is one or the other, so don't quote me exactly, but Honorius had a Visigothic or Gothic general telling him what to do, and the other one, Arcadius, had a Vandal. So whilst you say, oh, they were just nomadic tribes, they were ingrained in the royal family. And if you look at the battles that took place in the 300s to 400s, you have Magnus Maximus. He comes over with his father. They take over a big portion of the empire, and you get them coming over from the east. The in the east that rises up is all barbaric armies. He goes around gathering them all up, and he says we're going to have to fight the British essentially, but they don't say it's the British. They call him Magnus the Usurper because obviously they ended up winning. So it's kind of been twisted that way. But if you notice, the before Attila the Hun even turned up, they were already well ingrained in Roman society as high up generals and stuff like that. And then obviously because they're high in the army, they'd marry into the royal family. So the minute that, you know what I mean, if you're a top general, you might be offered like one of the princesses or something. And that's how they got themselves into the royal family itself.
Calm down, Luke. Don't get too excited.
Yeah, and then as they become prominent minority in the culture, once the homeland shows back up, all of a sudden the old parties start up again.
Pretty much.
Man. So, JP, what are you thinking about? What does that make you think? You're muted.
We've all done it.
I'm absolutely stunned. I'm learning more than I had hoped to learn. I've told you before that I wasn't going to watch a bunch of videos about all the Tartaria stuff. I was going to learn it over time, and I'm regretting that now. So, because I have nothing to say.
Oh no, well, you know a lot about history though, and so anything, even if we're gonna like be like, well, actually, here's our take on that. Like,
well, this is the take that I haven't really cross-sected yet. So,
but you've thought about England, and you've thought about, I know you think about like the royal like lineage of kings. I know that's like something you think about.
My history goes back a little bit further. How
about that Kate Middleton though? Think she's alive?
Full circle again. Oh man.
Like, oh my god, like they're so bad at this. Like, holy shit. I really think that she's fine. She just has something going on with like maybe her neck and her face that she doesn't want to be on camera, because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt.
I just think that she's probably annoyed at him because he had that affair last year, and it's like she's like, I don't have to go on camera. Screw you, But I don't like, again, with the caring. I'm trying so hard to
no, definitely.
Like, oh, God,
let's not even talk about it because it's not the kind of thing.
I don't even. It's not even like the royals. I'm concerned for her personal well-being just because she's a human being. But I'm also like laughing at these people because like if Queen Elizabeth was still alive, she would not be letting them clown themselves like this.
Dude, how is it possible that the prince is not Banksy? I'm so convinced more and more.
Banksy is an M16 creation.
Dude. Yeah, clearly. I mean, I think what it is, he's like, look, you're my security guards. You have to take care of me while I go and graffiti because I'm the teenage prince. And they had to eventually just like come up with a way to keep it safe. Dude, what
Yeah,
else
he's like-
is Banksy than like the British and mind control, but probably from the freaking prince himself.
Yeah, no, they let you get enough counterculture to feel like a radical without actually threatening any of their interests. That's what Banksy is to me.
Yeah, that's what it kind of feels like. I don't know. Also the idea of the kings is interesting. Talking about the Visigoths is interesting because mentioning like the Visigoths and the Vandals, like two great bands. They're so colorful, and the idea that they were so culturally connected to the Arabs with their bright colors, like the idea of wearing these, green and yellows, things that were associated with like the Arabs.
No, it's Mediterranean in general. Even back in the ancient Greek statues that we have in perfect white marble were painted in ridiculous bright primary colors.
Yeah,
it's debatable as well where that kind of comes from, because we've got stories that originally, when the tribes of Israel went on their exodus from Egypt, well, when they decided we don't want to be slaves anymore, the Egyptians asked the Scythians that were in the area to give chase, and there are stories that the Scythians said no, and instead they moved to the west and ended up forming like a kind of conglomeration on the North African coast. So there's debates over whether the Scythians came in then. But then also what I was talking about before with the Vandals and the Visigoths, there was a period in the late 200s, early 300s, where as the Roman Empire was starting to fragment, we had an invasion of these Vandals into France, and there was a battle going on. So basically they were fighting the Romans on their eastern front. So they were in France. They were fighting the Romans on the east, and they were also fighting the British who were coming in over the coast. And they had fights with the British who were kind of Roman remnants as well. And they got sent. It was by a dude called Constantine, but he wasn't the original Constantine. He was another Constantine. But they had fights with these Vandals and stuff. And they sent them south to the Pyrenees. All the survivors, basically, they'd chased them south. And they were there. And they said, right, go into Spain and we won't chase any further. And at that point, the guys jumped over the Pillars of Hercules, which is at, kind of going over into North Africa. And they moved into the Carthaginian Empire. And that's where they kind of took their house in Carthage. And they became the original pirates that fought the Romans. And I don't think they got rid of them until the 500s. It was the Eastern Roman Empire. I want to say one of the Justinians, I think, maybe, is the one that took down the Carthaginians. And then they ended up migrating to Ireland after that. But for a while, this Spanish element was connected with North Africa. And I think that's just kind of held for hundreds of years. I mean, if you look as well, there was an Iberia in the Caucasus. There was two Iberias. One was in the Caucasus, and then obviously the one in Spain.
I did not know that. Were they culturally connected, or did they just happen to have the same?
Well, I'd assume that they're culturally connected, but I haven't been able to see too much on it.
Iberian has a very, very specific lineage. If you ever look at it, there's even a distinguished like jaw and cheekbone structure among those peoples. You can kind of see it in my face a little bit.
Well, I mean, the mad thing is how history repeats, because even if you go back to World War II, you had Moroccan migrations over, to Franco's kind of establishment, and Hitler and all that were assisting them actually. And it just shows that this element, this North African connection to Spain, has stayed for over 1,000 years.
Crazy.
Barcelona is also like the best Netsky song, by the way, if anybody listens.
The best who song?
Netsky.
Netsky. I don't know who Netsky is.
Oh my god, yeah.
All right. I'm in. I can tell I'll be down.
Oh, you'll love it.
What do you think about the sandcastles?
Whoa, that's a sandcastle? How tall is that thing?
It's sandstone, but it's like a real castle in England, in Spain. That looks like.
Oh, that's wild. Is that the one that they took like 800 years to build or something like that they just recently finished?
I don't think so. There's a bunch of castles like this that are super old. And trying to restore them is a pain because you have to sandblast them to get the soot off of them. And now that they do, they're like, wait, they're not
So
black and
soft.
ugly. They're actually like pink and pretty. Yeah. So it
That's
looks
wild.
like a castle or like a cave and things like that.
And what part of the world does this come from?
Spain.
Spain. Oh, yeah, it does look Mediterranean. Something that always strikes me about Mediterranean culture is that it really is constant, almost regardless of who happens to be ruling any particular region of the area. They might change the names of things, but they really keep the the flavors and the aesthetics similar, which I think is cool. Like
I mean,
Italian and Afghan
it's
food,
very
not
gothic,
that
isn't
different.
it?
Yeah. It's interesting how much of Spain was controlled by the Goths, but how many of the Goths were Arabs. And so you have this geometry influence on them. It's also weird, like looking at people in the Mediterranean, because you have people that were clearly like super African and super blonde that had
Mhm.
families, like the cultures that like, so there's a lot more cultural merger and integration and gene flow and just all sorts. It's crazy to think about how much more communication there was between people, because
Do you
we
think
got to a
just
point
because
where
there was like increased competition between like different like intellectuals in that area, like it may have accelerated the pace of civilization at the time, just because
I
there were
think
so
that
many
there
different.
was. So I look at like specifically Spain, like cargo cult almost. You've got all of these people coming from other places,
Mhm.
and they were allowed to flourish. I mean, there were far more wars back east. If you look at India and where the um, like
Along the
West
actual
India,
Silk Road.
yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot
of
more
course.
violence going on, and so Spain was a lot more peaceful at that time, and it became
Yeah, because
really
there was nothing on the other
stable.
side of it.
Right. So it's kind of like how America or like Canada or something like that, it's just like somewhere kind of a little farther away. And so it was
Well,
allowed to take data from all these different cultures, and they were,
another thing about the United States and the geography here is that it doesn't lend itself to fractionalization like the Mediterranean area does. Not having any seas along the coast allows the central authority to maintain control over everything a lot more easily. When you have something that like reaches back around as a peninsula and is like right across the water from you, it's kind of hard to maintain control of those people around the back through the land, and it's easy for them to project force at you from across the water. So that's why I think Europe has a lot of smaller countries and only recently federalized, but the United States immediately did so when it got, a transnational control system. Like railroads and telegraphs were the reason the United States was able to flourish so quickly. And then Europe had to play catch up because they already had their
I
ingrained
think
system where it
I
was.
think they got lucky. I think that the technology came up right whenever they were settling the vastness of the known West of America, and that technically they took advantage of it. But then, yes, everybody else was like, "Wow, this works. We should do this too."
Yeah. But I think the grand acceleration of culture happened from the fact that there were so many people vying for, economic and political control over the Mediterranean.
so like, and again, there was like so much room. So in Spain, they had freedom and time, and they built these crazy, they'd find geysers. So they had access to
Mhm.
water. They'd build a giant castle. And you go look at these things, they're like 20, like walls longer than you'd think, like the Great Wall of China across Spain, all of these counties that are just surrounded in these huge fortifications. So they had time to do that. And then also, once they were in those things, so even if this was built before them, the fact that they're able to live in those castles when they're attacked and sieged, and they have water supplies again because
Mhm.
of geysers, they
Hot
can
water.
outlive any siege. So they end up doing really well. This is the thing that like people will get sieged for 3 years at certain points in some
Now,
of
were
these
these
castles.
counties operated by counts?
So they were mostly by the imams. So you had like in the Arabic culture, you have like a religious order that builds up.
Wasn't me.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. That was mine.
I have all my other tabs muted right now.
I'll send Raph the link. I think Raph might join. Cool. But yeah, we can also. But I'll be ready for Europa. I'm doing Europa right after this too. That's funny. Okay, but yeah, so like the fact that the castles were controlled by the Muslims meant that they had these huge religious orders, and they allowed Jews. So there were in was it Lorca in Heliorcus? Heliorcus is the city of Lorca in South Spain. They have these
Okay.
giant towers that they look they're like obelisks, but they're towers, and then like people lived in them. And then they had castles that were on mountains, and they have an entire settlement where the Jews were at, and
That
the
sounds
Christians.
beautiful.
It was rad until the Christians tried to kill everybody in that.
The Christians
town.
or the Catholics?
Well, so this is convoluted, but like they were Catholics, but the early Catholics are prototypical. So this is like after the Council of Nicaea, but before the Saint Arius struggle. So it's like really like 300s. This is before.
when do the
this
Catholics
is maybe
really
1300s.
rise? Like when's the official? I'm not sure when do we clarify this as Catholicism.
I'd say if you're not using flamenco, 329 or something like that, because when
325 is Council of Nicaea with Constantine, and
so after the Council of Nicaea, about 4 years of war goes on. And I'd say
Catholicism just means canonical Christianity when you get into like Romanism and shit. So like it's really just like what is and isn't when they started like official Christianity.
Well, no, it's more like when did the Catholic Church that we consider today inherit the tradition? Because they're saying we killed everyone else. Well, no, because first you have Yeshua, you have Jesus, he's alive, and then he's got his friends, and then you have witnesses of that, and they're called martyrs, and then they all get murdered by Paul, and then Paulines go on, and then there's this planting of St. Peter in Rome, where there's no evidence that this is the case. And Paul was dying thinking that he'd completely failed, because he didn't convert Rome. So it's interesting that we end up with a Pauline Christianity because of Marcion anyway. But then they revolt against Marcion. So the Christians, then you have like cannibal Christians, you've got psycho Christians that are in Donatists, the Donatists, which are pretty cool actually. Like they're just saying you have to be pure to do the Eucharist. And then this other group of Christians don't like that. They end up in power, kill the Donatists, and you have also warriors that join their sect because like they've kind of conquered the Donatists, and they're like, well, if you want to be violent, be part of our order. And you've got Saint Augustine.
Which one of these marched on the Sephardics of Spain?
So after Saint Augustine decides that he doesn't like Manichaeans, and then they kind of decide they're going to go to war after the Council of Nicaea. And that's when they start forcing people towards becoming like, if you don't believe this, what we believe, you're not actually a Christian. That didn't exist before that point. You go to any different group of Christian, they were all confederated different churches with their own beliefs, and they had their different gospels. Gospels was just what the good news meant. So everyone had, there weren't even books a lot of the time, or there were books. There were like hundreds of tiny books that were like, this is this story of Steve and Jesus. One time Steve went to the beach.
Simon and Jesus.
Simon and Jesus, like eating a sandwich, like all kinds of like crazy. You've no idea. Like there was the Gospel of Nicodemus where Jesus hears hell. He has to go down there and he has to fly and save Adam and Eve, because all the people in hell, right, waiting for him. Where you been?
Was a kid in school, and he used his powers to blind one of the other students, and and he didn't put him back until his mother made him.
Yeah, there's one where Jesus kills the kid and then he brings him back from the dead. Or some
that
other
might be
guy
the same story with a different twist. Blindness might be the light touch.
There's some weird stories about Jesus that didn't end up in our Bible. And the other thing is there's different kinds of Jesus.
Because they show that Jesus didn't start being a good guy because he was just born perfect. They said he started being a good guy because he realized it was easier to not be a dick.
Well, so then again, there's
kind of like why the God of the Old Testament is mean and the God of the New Testament isn't, because he came to earth, experienced manhood, and was like, oh wow, that's a lot harder than I expected it to have been.
Tristan says as long as
these guys,
as long as the early birds don't crap in my car, I'm fine with this. All right, thank you, Tristan. I appreciate the $10. Yeah. There's different kinds of Christians: the Marcions, the Ebionites, the Valentinites, the Donatists. Like so. I think the Ebionites, I forget if it's the Ebionites, but there's a group that believed that Jesus became the Christ when he was baptized. There's like he'd finally achieved Neo state. It's in the Matrix. Okay. He's like, I'm not the one, and then you're like,
oh, y'all are moving into my topic now.
But not everybody believed that. The Marcionites believed that Jesus was always the Christ, and then Arian said that Jesus was created and became the Christ when he was born. Because
I thought Arians didn't believe that he was the Christ at all.
No,
Because
see
when
that's and this is why they killed people, because they don't know anything about Arian.
Right,
Arian was
because
actually super based.
when we had the Council of Nicaea originally, the story was that the Arians, obviously not Arian with a Y, you know, with an I,
Yeah, Saint
just to
Arius.
clarify for anyone, yeah,
Not the German.
they were apparently angry because they didn't want Jesus to be deified, right? So
Right.
the whole point of the Council of
Not
Nicaea was
deified.
obviously, well, Council of Nicaea was basically saying this guy's the Son of God. He was, you know, God incarnate, etc., etc., and they didn't believe that, and they were like,
Not
no.
quite. That
And they
wasn't
were
quite the issue.
well, they were supposed to have a debate on it, and I know that the guys moved the debate forwards. They said, you know, for example, we're going to have it at 1 o'clock, and then on the day they were like, actually, we're going to have it at 11. And unfortunately, none of the Aryans had turned up. So when the Aryans did arrive, they came and they were like, "Oh, I'm really sorry, we've already had the vote, and you weren't here." So, oops.
And the official story the Catholic Church tells is that Saint Nicholas, Santa Claus, was debating with Saint Arius directly, and he slapped him across the face. And there's a painting, and I always think about this, Saint Nicholas.
Santa slapping the Aryan.
Yeah, because he's like, how dare you believe this stuff? Here's the paint. There's so many paintings of it. Here's one of the.
God.
Wow.
Here's another painting of it. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of this going on. This I'm not kidding when I say that this is a story that people sing about. You know what I mean? Like, how could you believe that? Slap. Look at this one. Oh my God. What's even happening? He's punching him in this one, and he's black.
Wow.
See? This is the most historically accurate one, ironically. Anyway, because yeah, Santa Claus was probably black, but at least partially.
I mean, he spent a lot of time outside. He must have at least been tan.
He was like Berber, Turkish, Greek from North Africa.
Above the clouds, you can have so much UV. He's going to definitely be getting.
It's possible he was this blonde, blue-eyed albino guy. I'm just saying the probability of that is lesser than higher. But the idea that Jesus was turned to the Messiah because he earned it is different. That's I think again the Ebionites, the Arianites, the Arians, Saint Arius, believe that the Son of God was created by God. So it is God in man, but it's not it's still restrained, it's still God, but it's not a different God. It's not a separate person.
Right.
Really.
It's the same
But Jesus is the separate person because Jesus is a human. And so the experience of Jesus living and being in the human body and the conditions that restrain God to the flesh are very specific. And there's only so much that the human mind can fathom. And if you can say that this human mind is like perfect and this human body is like perfect, right? Because then there would be different things happening. Like Jesus is talking to God, but God's not there with him in the Garden of Gethsemane because it's probable that the human body cannot withstand being in the presence of God without dying, right? And there's been certain things where like Moses was made to be able to see or hear God and these different things. But if that's the case with Jesus, it's taking away from the benefit of what it is. It's proof that the human condition it's possible to do this thing. To be a perfect person is possible. And we're showing it's not that there's a cheat code that God used. God got in the vehicle, God picked up the video game controller and played the game and won. And we could all play the game. Right. That's the
say that it won is very subjective. You know,
it was a really close score.
And I don't know if we're there yet at that winning point.
And I would agree 100% with JP that God, Christ was murdered and it's not a win.
Like when Jesus was in the desert, Satan made a very compelling argument for him to cancel the entire project of Earth when he got back home.
Wait,
the only reason God didn't do that was because there was 13 people who thought that was cool, that was worth forgiving.
Say it again, Sean. I didn't catch
when Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, Satan made a very compelling argument to him for him to end the whole project of Earth when he got back home. And the reason he didn't do that was that there were 13 people he thought were cool enough to forgive the rest of us over.
Exactly. I think that enough people do not give credit to the people that he encountered.
Yeah.
I think
there are more people that he encountered that treated him badly than the ones that treated him good.
To be fair, though, don't you think we'd all be like that? Like, if you got to heaven and God was like, "So, what do you think?"
Well, there was a person,
There
was a person who was so loving of this person that he betrayed him out of faith.
That's horrible.
Out of
That's the
Yeah, I
thing.
mean,
Most of
elaborate
Jesus'
on
friends suck. Jesus' friends suck. Like doubting Thomas, and then or was it Simon Peter? Who's the one who refused, like the cock crows? And you're denying me 3 times. Is that Peter? You're denying me 3 times. Is that Peter?
I don't
Satan,
remember.
get behind me. Satan, get behind me is Peter.
I think that it lends too much credit to the idea of the mark of the beast, the idea that something cannot wonder. You know, he came down and
Peter.
he met 12 friends, in my opinion, that were able to wonder like he is able to wonder. And he said, this species is definitely worthwhile.
I'm gonna go ahead and say 13 because of that lady friend of his, Mary Magdalene. It's pretty important for sure. But
I
no,
was
but to
saying
be fair,
11 of his
wouldn't you be
friends,
the same?
the
Like,
lady friend Mary and his mom.
yeah, it's true. His
wouldn't
mom.
you feel the same though? Like if they gave you the choice to destroy the world and you're like, yeah, go on then, it was a bit of shit. But then they go,
I think
oh,
that's why we don't have
even
that.
even your cat, and you're like, oh no, my cat's pretty awesome actually. Nah, go on, nah, let them live. Let them live. And I think that's the way I'd be. I'd definitely think, yeah, destroy it all, it's awful. And then look at a cute little animal and go, actually, they deserve another chance. You know?
Mind control. I don't know. I think the idea though that it's not because
I'm not sure that
St.
it
Arius,
is exactly
St.
the
Arius
same.
was trying to stop Docetism. He didn't want people to think Jesus was like this bulletproof dude who felt no pain, who didn't actually, because like it was starting to get that
He
way.
had
Where
to
people
feel
like,
pain to
Jesus
forgive
was-
us.
they're like, Jesus is a superhero who feels no pain and was awesome, and you'll never be able to touch that. But the original idea was like, hey, if we all start living like this, we can just forgive our debts of each other. And then they murdered a guy for saying that. And then they're saying, well, the murder of the guy is like a blood atonement sacrifice. So like everything got turned upside down really quickly, you know?
Yep. Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
funny
that
because in history we
Jesus-
usually murder people like that as a species.
Okay,
I don't think that Jesus knew what he was really capable of. I think
Yeah.
that God, whenever he came down, I don't think that he would have said, okay, I'm going to know everything I know now. I think that he's going to say, I'm going to give them a chance. I'm going to let the avatar that I'm encompassing know what I know, but not know why. You understand? So he was able to save some people. He was able to use it for good. He was able to use it to save people that he knows, people that he meets along his journey. But I'm not sure if he knew why he knew everything. And I think that the reason for that would have been that, you know, he could have affected too much change, and he would have affected too much conflict in the experimentation of what Jesus might have been for him. So, you know,
I mean, to be fair, in the Gospel of Thomas, doesn't Jesus say people think that I'm coming to bring, peace and all that,
exactly.
but I'm actually coming to bring fire, war, and destruction.
Oh yeah,
He's trying to prove
what's
stuff
good
wrong.
for God is not always good for a man. Like God's plan doesn't always involve perfect peace and everything. It involves whatever is going to actually happen.
So speaking of that, actually, what do you guys think of the whole millennial reign theory? Maybe you haven't heard of it, but it's
reign?
it's a prominent thing, particularly in the Tartaria community. They believe that, I mean, it does stem from Fomenko, but they believe that 1,000 years have been added onto our timeline to erase the fact that Jesus did actually return and that the events of Revelations have essentially already occurred.
When you say 1,000 years have been added, would that mean we're actually in the year 1024 rather than 2024?
Essentially, that's what they believe. Yeah.
So the whole Middle Ages was just an invention.
So the shuffle
That's what they
together, the shuffling.
I'd say from that perspective, I'd say you'd have to think from the God top-down perspective.
Well, hold on, just because to understand what that means, because earlier we even said, like, you were like, when did this happen? Like 300 or 1300? Because the idea is that after we think of the fire of 1666, we think of the Roman occupation of Rome versus the Istanbul Christians, the original Constantinople Christians that had to leave during the Ottoman Exodus, the simultaneous calendars, the lunar calendars of the Hebrews and the Arabs, the Russian calendars, which don't synchronize with the Western calendars, which were used until 1924. And the 1924 calendars that they found that are synchronized very well with the Arabic calendars and the Ottoman calendars. And what it looks like is examples that we've found before, like the Pseudo-Isidorian decrees, which they're coffee stained forgeries that the Roman Church created in order to pretend that there's a reason for celibacy in the priesthood. There's never been a reason for this. It was created by this fake forgery in like the 11th century. But again, this gets more convoluted because the Jesuit suppression, they were actually excommunicated. All of the Jesuit priests were kicked out of the Catholic Church at the 1750s. And so they ended up for about 100 years secretly trying to take over the Catholic Church again until they got back in, dug up the body of the Pope, burned him, took his soul out of heaven they put him on trial, and then they took his corpse and then said, all right,
this.
they excommunicated him. So then they burned all the books, and they don't know exactly what year it is after that. And so you've got all these examples where like the years are back and forth. So Fomenko, as we was talking about earlier, is a Russian scientist who, granted, the Russian government and the Soviet Union probably made him write a bunch of propaganda, but he's also put a bunch of decent chronological evidence in that shows that events that we think of that happened in the 7th century might have happened in the 17th century. And it's really interesting to imagine like Islam and the American Revolution being a lot closer tied together, like 100 years apart, for instance, the creation of modern Islam, and also this idea of proto-Islam, what might have existed in the past before, the 16th century, what we understand, but the 3rd century being Constantinople period, and also the 13th century being the rise of the Jesuits. It's really interesting in terms of the calendar because you can find just multiple events where these 10 lines of kings, birthday to death day, and the years between them are the same as these lines of kings, birthday to death day. Only they happen 600 years different, but they're 12 generations in a row, same birthdays and years in between them. And so you're like, okay, well, they just the Catholic Church supplanted this story when they came to this place, and they taught this to say this happened here at that point, but it's the same history that happened somewhere else 500 years earlier.
Yeah, it only takes one generation to totally rewrite the history of a people. So that's not impossible if they were literally just transplanting myths from one place to another, if they wanted to see if the same myths would generate, I guess, the same type of, society. And having that much power and over that much time, it would surprise me if they weren't experimenting with entire populations over multiple centuries.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Luke. I just wanted to rant. I missed my ranting. That's fun.
Oh, it's all good. I was gonna say actually, there's a great book that I read last year. It's called you probably remember CX the camera, but it's called "Where Is Jesus Buried?"
Put it right in front of your chest. Put it right in front of your chest and stand up. There you go. Where is Jesus buried?
Oh, and it's backwards. Yeah.
No, it's forwards for us.
Yeah. For you.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Right.
it always.
You got to have your face in this frame so it knows what is you. There you go.
I see it. Where is Jesus buried? Japan? Tell me more.
No, it basically says that he was buried in
I've
Wales.
heard that.
Pretty good.
Build
story,
in Wales. I could have guessed and made money.
Yeah,
That's just the English Japan.
English Japan. Well, I mean, it's quite interesting. It's a very good story. It goes into whether or not he isn't buried in Wales. Debatable. But there definitely was somebody buried in Wales known as the Fisher King. And the Fisher King is connected, obviously, to Jesus. So
That's really interesting.
Here's
What
the
kind
theory.
of mythology goes around that?
Here's the theory, and that this is something that I want to try to use to bridge multiple sects of thinking right now. Okay, so you have ultra naturalists that believe in telepathy and psychokinesis and connections between human beings or beings for that matter. Okay?
Wireless. Yeah.
And then you have people who believe in ancient aliens. Okay, why has there never been a theory that Jesus could have been born as multiple entities existing as the same entity in multiple bodies? Why is nobody else?
Isn't that like most people?
Isn't that Hindu Christianity?
That's like a lot of
I believe
the
that there
New
is
Age.
that basis there.
Yeah, there are Hindus who are Christians, and they believe exactly that we're all Jesus deep down.
Well, they could have killed an entity in Jerusalem, and still that knowledge would persist. And that person who is the same entity, has the same physical body, would be in all these different places, and everybody would experience him after the fact with the same knowledge, the same experience. Why would God not be that intelligent? Why would God not have those contingencies in place to try to spread that knowledge? Why would that not be the case? Why is nobody ever thought of this, Ned?
There's been tons of
Jesus-
people that have been saying they're female claimant. I'm sorry, female claimant. Christ claimants, like that say that they're like reincarnations of Christ, but also
I don't
they
know
have
lot
that.
of women do that.
I
though,
mean,
yeah.
as that when Mary produced Jesus, she produced at least up to 8 other versions of himself at the very same time. Do you understand?
My God, if Jesus was octuplets,
So one went to
and they
India,
had an
one
acrobatic
went
act.
to England. Everybody's learning at the same time.
way better
Everybody's
religion.
pulling
I'm
all
sorry,
this
but-
information of all human knowledge at the same time. What's the probability?
I think more the idea though that Christ was saying is that everyone, like Yeshua wasn't like
How do
Christ
you
isn't his
test
name,
humanity
right? Like
without really
Yeshua's like
knowing?
Yeshua's like a
Christ is the
Xirtus.
title,
It's like
Jesus
a
was
title.
the name, God is the I.
But no, it's a dude. It's a dude who said we could all do this thing I'm doing. And
Mhm.
so it's not like you got to like watch me die and be grateful I'm dead so you can be immortal like a vampire. It's like if we all do what I'm doing here, like not rocking the karmic boat, I'm going to stop. Like if there's like this caustic karma and people are in trauma from it, I'm going to alleviate it. That's
There
literally
are a lot of positive things you can derive from the fable. Just so long as you get something positive out of it, I think it's done its
but
job.
it's not supposed to
Like,
be a
why he
fable.
gave
That's
us-
what's a
I
bummer.
do agree with that.
It shouldn't
yeah.
be. It
No,
shouldn't be
it
a
just because
fable.
it's
It
a
should be
fable
like
doesn't mean it didn't happen.
okay. So like, what if you were a dude who spent your life not claiming debts, and your whole message was like, yeah, no, actually, I don't give anything out that I want back. And that became such a big deal. Like, honestly, I think that everyone should do this. Like, we should just not, like, money wise, we should just forgive debts because slavery, we should just forgive debts. And that became such a huge thing. And then they murdered you over it. And now everyone's slaves and everyone's banking and everything that you were against, that you were trying to stop people from doing and showing them that you had a life trick that was good to avoid that. Like, that's not what they're focusing on. They're focusing on wearing like a picture of you that costs money and saying that like your blood will make them immortal. It's weird. It's not what Yeshua wanted, you know? Like, it's not a fable. It's like it's a bro who's trying to tell you how to like forgive debts, you know, for karmic reasons.
I agree completely that at some point in time, you know, the entities that had access to immortality were trying to guide humanity, and over time they have not really accessed the right say influences to you know, hit the goal on the head, you know, and things have gotten lost in the message.
Like, it's really weird how distanced we are from the idea of being like this guy that we think is so great to be like.
I also think.
Well, I
you
mean,
said something about the immortals trying to guide us in the right direction. Like that's an interesting assumption on its face, because I'm sure that there are a lot of immortal beings who are quite jealous of humanity because we get to live and die rather than just sit there static.
I'm
Like,
more
we
and
get
more
to
convinced
taste
that-
things. We
I
get
like
to feel
the
things.
saying,
We get
that's
to fucking eat.
I'm more
The
and more
first
convinced
time that I've
that
heard someone say something that heaven depends on existence that we have more than the other way.
there's definitely like two
Imagine never
personas
tasting
that
a
are the
grape
faith.
for eternity. That's what it's like to be an angel.
Well, I mean, they do say, don't they, when the angels came down, they were immediately seduced by the children of men, you know?
Oh,
They're
yeah.
immediately like, oh,
Sure.
shit, I did not realize you guys
meaning-
were so hot. Like,
Yeah, because they can become something mortal, but not vice versa. They have to give something up.
Yes, they have to give up the immortality.
Imagine the deep-seated jealousy you'd feel by looking at that.
and as well, you got to think that Jesus himself and the Bible says usury is a crime, as in giving a loan where you take any profit. That's a sin.
Any profit or
Usury
excess
is a
profit?
sin. As in any profit. If you loan something to somebody, you should just get the thing back, and that's the end of it. So when you look at what we're going through at the moment in the economy, I mean, it's simplified, but you can essentially boil it all down to inflation from
Rent
interest
seeking.
rates, which are essentially just loans. And that's what it is, because, you know, every time they loan something to somebody, they're creating wealth, and they create that wealth, which devalues the rest of the wealth in the system, because
There
the
will
more of
be a
something you have.
reckoning.
Yeah. And there's just kind of the system that they're running at the moment. And it just shows that, you know, it doesn't matter how much you read the Bible, how much you go to church, if you're still taking a loan, even though you're the victim in it, you're technically taking part in the sin. We're a society of sin.
you're supporting the
usury.
system.
The way that the Bible
There's
supports
no dealers
sin,
without junkies.
There is no sin that is more important than the idea that everything that we know now as sin could have been imparted on humanity at some point in the past, but there was an entity that chose not to do that because he was at some point otherwise jealous of the attention that this new entity was getting. It doesn't matter. The fact is that that entity has already been declared to receiving all of our responsibility as a species. In that
What do you
there
mean
are a
receiving
lot of people,
responsibility? Hold
in
on.
that there are a lot of people who see that and have created themselves a character of themselves, like Charles Manson. I can see that if he would have come to that conclusion, he goes, "Oh, I can kill anybody, and I'm not responsible for myself." In the end, after hell, after being stored as an entity that broke the rules, so to
That's
speak.
the problem with the way that inversion of Christianity, like Pauline Christianity with cannibalism and everything else, and saying, hey, yeah, this blood sacrifice, this is a great thing. With the death of this guy, you don't have to ever try to do anything good ever again. Right? That's the exact opposite, I'm pretty sure.
And then the Romans take a picture or a statue of him nailed to the fucking wall and point at him and say, "This is what we do to people who talk like that."
You don't like the money, get out.
So that's true too. There's an inversion of that message because eventually that becomes, you're like, hey, you know what? That's awesome that happened to that guy. I want that to happen to me. But I don't think that lasts
eventually,
forever.
Well, I mean, you can even see like the way they've kind of twisted things that we talk about now. So this is my interpretation. So feel free to tell me that I'm wrong. But there's one bit in the Bible where it's talking about you must not trade in the temple, right? And Jesus gets really angry because you're trading in the temple, and it's like, this is an insult to God. You shouldn't trade inside the temple, trade outside the temple. And I feel like that in itself is kind of a mishmash of what he's really saying. Like, the trading itself is bad. It's not that you're doing it inside the temple, it's that you're kind of, because trading is inherently immoral, right? We don't realize this, but we think of it as like, it's supply and demand, isn't it? Right? So for example, if I've got the food and you come to me with no food, I can charge you whatever price I want because you have no food. And in the game, that's fine. That's because that's within the rules of the game, isn't it? To make profit. But morally, that's not okay.
That's in the rules of the game that we created, or in this case, that we have garnished over the many thousands of years that we've had to do to survive, not having the technology to subsist.
Why don't you play the game?
But it's one of those things, though, isn't it? Where it's a twisted sentiment of kind of like, oh well,
why are you in a position with no food though? Did you put yourself in that position, or did misfortune visit you?
Well, I suppose it comes down. It doesn't matter about like where that comes from. In the essence of the price shouldn't change, because if someone runs to you and says, "Well, hey, I'm starving," and you go, "Okay, before I feed you, why are you starving? Are you starving because you're an idiot? Are you starving because you're actually starving?"
How many times have they come to you with that same story?
Yeah, because I suppose
it's the 10th time, and if they've done it to themselves, then you aren't helping them.
But I mean, if the price was always kind of set, if you didn't increase the price based on somebody's need, then you wouldn't have to face that moral dilemma. If somebody came to you,
moral dilemma,
with something, let's say you needed something swept up and he needed to be fed, and you said, "Listen, sweep that up because this is the 9th time you showed up asking for food. Do this for me first, and then I'll feed you."
But Sean,
that's not what I'm saying. Though.
Hold on, Sean, you're coming from an urban New York environment where there is enforced scarcity on purpose, and you can also look and see. Imagine if you're like a bold
entropy enforces scarcity.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's a beautiful thing. The entropy also enforces abundance. There's always abundance for a rat and for a cockroach in New York City because entropy does enforce scarcity, but it also enforces abundance if you know how to exploit entropy.
But if the man is enforcing scarcity upon himself, you've got to say, "Do me a favor before I do you a favor the 9th time."
You're being Taoist. That's fair. That's
but to be fair, I think it was like misunderstanding the point that I was making. Like,
hold on, I want to say, if you have a natural environment, if your whole city was planted with fruit trees everywhere, there wouldn't be a problem. There'd be food everywhere.
It would be a wasp problem.
Okay, there are wasps.
What I'm trying to say is not. I'm not saying if somebody comes to you with no money and you have to feed him. That's out of the question. I'm just saying if somebody comes to you with the same money, right? we have a society where it's acceptable to say, well, actually, you look like you're really hungry. So even though you're offering me the exact money that costs for this pasty, I'm actually going to say the pasty is now double the price because you look like you really need it. That's the point I'm getting at.
Now,
It's
yeah,
the
that's
immoral.
predatory.
Question of free
Yeah,
will.
yeah, which is something that we have in society. It's called supply and demand. So you have to,
Right,
yeah,
yeah, when
you
I'm
can go into the nuances. Yeah, if there's a genuine scarcity, if the water has run dry, then of course the water is going to be more valuable. And
But it
but
is
that's a
weird that
deeper
we
thing.
learn
there's
something.
it's weird that we have scarcity at all because it doesn't have to exist, right? Like there's no
The
reason
moment that
Yes.
scarcity exists, it's because, in this case, a human wants to get more than they freely could get without it.
No,
I mean,
Yeah, I'd agree.
scarcity.
don't-
We have not progressed beyond scarcity. That is an insane concept.
we need to if we progress beyond at least having and this is like the Afro China model is if everyone has access to a certain amount of rice a day, like UN amounts of food a day, then you've kind of done your job to keep them from robbing people as much as you can. Like if they're going to destroy the society, it's no longer on you because you've at least placated and again with this idea that if you don't feed the poor might rob you. If you don't if you have potholes in the street in the poor section of town, your rich kids might play with the poor kids and fall in those potholes. So you have to take
it's not
care
just
of
about feeding the poor. You have to keep them busy too, because if you just give them a meal, they'll go out and start getting themselves.
Well,
into
that's
some
what I mean
sort
about
of
edible
trouble.
landscapes. Edible landscapes are great because if you want food, you have to go pick it.
No, because then the squirrels will pick it.
I just want to make a
Tree
point
rats
before we
will
run out
come.
of time that until we have the history where we all have experienced basically the worst that humanity can offer, unfortunately, an actual recorded history of it, not just speculation, we're not going to know how to act as intelligent species. I think we're still in the kindergarten space of intelligent species.
But to be fair, I think we're actually digressing away from what we originally wanted to go for. But as in we're de-evolving as people. I was noting this as I was watching an older comedy.
Yeah.
You must have watched Only Fools and Horses. Some of you maybe. No one.
A little bit.
Only Fools and
Sounds
Horses.
English as fuck.
It is very English, but it's old, right?
It
And as
is.
they're talking in it, right, one of the jokes is talking about Christopher Wren, and Christopher Wren is a very obscure character to the modern age. But I was thinking like, whoa, that's a smart joke. And obviously, in the 60s or whatever, 60s to 80s, people understood these jokes, about Christopher Wren, who Christopher Wren was. And nowadays, we won't know who Christopher Wren is. I didn't know about it until I read a book by Robert Shaw. I did an interview on my channel with him, and I learned all about it from there. So, I'm not being a snob here. I genuinely had no idea about this. But when you realize that people in the past, they had a much bigger knowledge of history, than we do now. They, on a general scale, I'd say people about 50 years ago were more educated than we are.
There was a lot less culture to consume 50 years ago when there was only 2 billion.
100%. Yeah, when you don't have a million episodes of
the
like
cowboy,
TV to watch.
the pirate, the archetypes of 500 years were still constantly in the front
We
of
could get a
everyone's mind.
laser with a camera that knows what insect is good and bad and which squirrel is good and bad, and we could zap them or kill them if they're bad insects or if they're just like squirrels you don't want on your trees.
Do you think God would be okay with that? Just
do that
wondering.
upstate.
What do we have to do to keep the squirrels from eating all the fruit so that he can have an edible landscape in
Because
New
then
York
the
City?
fruits
Luke?
will rot because they're not preserved.
Well, I like
They
rats.
don't grow in a jar with
I'm
salt.
not cleaning up
and
Bushwick, all right?
aspartame.
I'd rather have
The
rats. than Bushwick than
idea
nothing.
here, from what I can see, is that we strive, and we always strive. And that the moment that we do not strive, we are God.
But Sean, you made a great point, like about there was less to consume. So yeah, 50 years ago, you would just sit there and you'd be like, oh, I may as well read this book on the geography of everything. You know what I mean? So people were smarter.
Even the retellings were reusing the same archetypes for the past 600 years. Look at the Scooby-Doo ghosts. Half of them are characters from books that are at least 200-300 years old.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
just because there was so much
That's
less.
because
And we're
Scooby
just
Doo's
reading,
about
so
real
nothing's really
ghosts.
new under the sun.
They're always trying to tell you that these real ghosts are fake, but they're actually real. Like, and then now in the new Scooby Doo, like most of the ghosts are real. I remember the first time I saw real ghosts on Scooby Doo, besides like the 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo, was Scrappy Doo.
When
There
you
was
realize that the content that they're getting comes from history and that there's really not that much to go on.
Dude, remember the African Slaves episode? There's like a whole movie episode that came out
No.
in like 2007 where they go to Atlanta and then they find all these African slaves that are actually dead because they were drowned on the boats.
And it wasn't just a bunch of like people
No,
in
no, no.
blackface or something.
It wasn't BLM. It was literally black slaves that Africans had been drowned and then they were literal ghosts. It was
I guess they must have
amazing.
done it tastefully enough that nobody got mad about it because I did not hear about that. No,
It was like
I'll watch it.
2007 or 2004. It was a long time ago. So I
Oh,
think
that was
was
back when you could literally say the N-word on daytime television and get away
Yeah.
with it. Like, oh my God. Like, they were literally pushing racism constantly between 2002 and 2007 on every single network that is now the most woke, like, sanitized garbage all day. Like,
I
they
thought
were
you meant
literally like
Nietzsche.
Chappelle Show, Mencia, all of that bullshit. All of that was Viacom. Like, come on.
Yeah. You think culturally they were trying to push racism so that they would get us out, like sick of it? Like they were like, "Hey, aren't we tired of it?" Like maybe that was the point.
No,
I feel
it's always divide, man. It's because at the moment we're at this point in our lives where I think the internet, just really exploded, particularly in that period that you were talking about, Sean. And I think they needed to keep this constant battle going. You'll see it now. I mean, you guys might not use Reddit as much as I do, but I can't help but scroll through it whenever I have a second free, and I noticed the amount of stuff that is definitely focused on gender wars. There's a lot of stuff aimed at, because obviously I'm a male, so I'll get that stuff pointed to me, and it's always stuff, look at this woman, how awful she's, treating this guy, and that's the vibe they're trying to push. Is this that women are just,
No, I
they're
noticed
always
immediately
yeah,
when they
because they're
started
trying to cause
uptaking
this.
with the racism, sexism, blah 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 online. And it originally started getting to me when I thought it was an actual reflection of how the world was becoming, and then I realized, wait a second, these are very small, isolated incidents, and it's just they're just reporting more on the background noise of the bullshit that shouldn't be going on, and it shouldn't be going on, but it wasn't increasing in frequency; it was just increasing in frequency of reporting. And I sat there and I was like, this is designed to do two things: distract me and piss me off. So I'm just going to go on the fitness subreddit and learn how to lift weight. And that, doing that was a lot better for me than sticking with that bullshit.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree with you because that's the whole thing is aimed at dividing. It's because if they keep us in pockets, if they keep us fighting each other in these little segments like Andreas has us, look, in our little 4 boxes, right?
How dare I?
Exactly, having our little debates and all the people watching, right? There we go. Unified China. That's what I'm talking about.
When really
but
we're more
that's-
like the Scooby Gang.
But well, yeah, exactly. The point is that they want us divided because apes together strong, right?
Yeah. No, I actually dated the niece of someone we've discussed earlier in this podcast. I'm not going to mention who. And she was one of those like extreme left wing woke girls, and it was really hard to even have a genuine relationship with her because every time there was something that happened in the news that bothered her, somehow it was my fault because I'm a white guy, even though I'm Jewish and Puerto Rican. It was really, really frustrating. And I tried to explain to her, like, hey, I don't just support Israel just because, you know what I mean? Like, I understand that they do some things wrong, but you can't even discuss that. Everything just has to be what's going on right here and now in this country. Meanwhile, we've got it better in this period in geography than pretty much anyone else in history. It was impossible to actually have a conversation with the girl. So it was the divide and conquer has taken root. And
Well, I think
probably
the Israel Palestine is a great one, isn't it? Because it's such a divider that it can immediately make you think like, oh, I don't want to talk to this person anymore because they believe in this. They are the devil. You know what I mean? They are the worst person I've ever met because they believe the opposite on me on this. And the thing is that the emotion side of it is completely justified because whichever side you support, people are dying. So you are justified no matter what you believe. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter as long as that at the core is your motivation. Then you are
you
technically
can support
justified.
the existence of a state and say that it does things that are not totally correct in your book. You know what I mean? Like I live in the United States. I love this country and I think it should continue existing. There are things that it does that I really don't like, and I think it should
Government
stop.
and people are
And I
different.
think you can
Israeli
say that
people are
about Israel,
people.
Palestine,
Yeah.
Ukraine, Russia, everything. You know,
Got a lot
Oh,
of Israeli
100%.
there's probably
friends, for
people there
sure.
who really depend on the existence of their nation and probably would not like it to stop existing. And they also would probably like it to stop doing things that probably threaten its own existence.
Yeah,
Like
Israelis.
I'm of the personal opinion that like at this point the entire world has already been consolidated as one giant nation. We just don't know about it.
No,
And it's
yeah,
done
yeah,
it's
that's true.
it's done via corporations and finances, because if
Yeah.
you look at World War II, that's when they realized like, oh my God, these guys can have wars and we can fund both sides and they still don't care. You know what I mean? And that was kind of where it came from. And I think that you look now at these Illuminati groups, people make big deals about that, but it is true in the essence that like the borders are only there to keep the conflicts going. The conflicts are there to keep the kind of the supply chains strained. And the
If you
reason
look at
is
the war
because
now, though,
it'll
it's all about the supply chain. Like they're just directly attacking economic supply
Oh,
chains. It's not
100%.
even
And it
about
boils
attacking
down
individual.
to a guy called Thomas Malthus, right? So Malthusism is this kind of idea that if you allow humans to just have whatever they want, they will overpopulate, and then they will strain the supply chains. Yeah, this is the guy. And they'll sort of strain the supply chains, and they'll inevitably cause, you know, the entire system to collapse. And therefore they thought that it was upon them to be able to create situations like war, famine, disease, etc., to cull populations, because in the long term they're actually saving the species. So you can see how this enters into, you know, real dark territory when you think that
Oh yeah.
if you're a rich person that controls I don't know, Walmart, for example, and you read this and you think, my God, I have a duty to save America by starving the population. That's essentially what these guys were believing in the 1900s. And still to this day, they think it's on them to control us via wars. And that's why they're sending people to the meat grinder in Ukraine, just to keep Russia is funneling its young people to not strain the supply chain. And that's the way I see
It's
it anyway.
crazy because this proves right here. First of all, I want to say something about the economic thing I said before, but that graph you just showed proves that being in good physical shape is worth more than a fucking $1 million. Because if you really need food in that situation, all you got to do is be faster and stronger than the guy next to you. You got to be able to get to it first and hold on to it. That's it. But what you said about we're all one big country under a big economic divide was like, if you really look at the way the wars are going right now, we've got the Red Sea, the Black Sea, and the South China Sea. It's all about attacking shipping vessels. There's nobody's attacking civilian populations anymore. The last time that happened was Hiroshima, and when a nation did that. 9/11 is the last time
Suez
a terrorist
Canal.
group did that
Suez
on a
Canal.
major scale.
Suez
But
Canal's pretty weird, and some of the things going on in
that's the Black Sea. Oh, sorry, the Red Sea.
Oh,
Or
what was the limit of the? Never mind, doesn't matter.
But yeah, the war is all about like this. Like, if we were to call the conflicts going on around the world right now World War III, it would be a bunch of economic rather than geographical conflicts. Yeah,
I think the water will end up still being a geographical this is why Pepsi was so important with Rockefeller in trying to make sure that they had nuclear tankers and Kalashnikovs and the ability to get through pirate water.
Didn't they give up their fighter, their aircraft carrier, Pepsi?
Did they do that? That's too bad. I'm sure
They're the
something
ones
way
that
cooler.
got it, and then it was like we can't like a country owed them money and then handed them an aircraft carrier and like a bunch of military equipment. They're like, we don't want to be a corporation with military. We're going to give this to the United States and like take the money, something like that.
I don't know.
Pepsi.
Pepsi had for like a long time. Like they had the largest, sixth largest navy. But I think that there's something they work with another company. Like PepsiCo works with another company now in order to do that because of the piracy issue. Because they don't want to be the corporation killing other pirates and stuff looks bad.
Right.
So now they're like, hey, we're not the one doing it.
I was going to say, speaking of this this stuff, going back to World War II, have you ever looked into like the Hindenburg and all that kind of stuff about whether or not?
Oh, the people who survived were the ones that didn't jump. Yeah, because it just slowly sank to the ground. It was just fire was on top.
Well, I was gonna say more into the political aspects of it, right? So obviously you had all these cameras there ready. Yeah, if you look at the
Imagine,
transcripts of the guy
imagine
that,
having the Empire State Building having an airport in it. That would be amazing.
well, this is what I'm right. This is what I'm saying. So if you look at what happens in 1937, the Hindenburg crashes, and it goes all over America, right? Before
Crash.
before this, these zeppelins and blimps and different types had been floating over American cities. They've been floating over. They do tours of America, right? German citizens regularly came from Hamburg to New Jersey on the zeppelins. Then they could fly to South America. They'd go to South America, and one of the pilots that would fly these things after this, he said that it was just definitely sabotage because the reason he says is that when he was flying this exact model and a different one to South America, he got hit by lightning in thunderstorms and absolutely nothing happened. And
Yeah, there
obviously
was no oxygen inside of it.
well, the official story is obviously that this is static energy that's just
I
It's
know.
caused it.
probably just diesel engines,
Like,
though. The diesel
if you
engines
have a
were
can
set
of
fire.
Lysol, that's a lot of fucking flammable shit in your hand in a metal tin. You could zap that with your fingers on, rub your feet on the carpet and zap that can all day. There's no oxygen in the can. It's not going to explode because there's no chemical reaction to take place.
Exactly. And if you look at World War One, right? World War One, the London raids, right? There was a Zeppelin raid in the UK at least every week for most of the war. Okay, about 52 through 1 year, and that means Zeppelins flying over. They've got artillery on the ground shooting at them. They've also got the planes. Fair enough, they
You
weren't
can't dodge it
advanced.
all.
They were still propeller planes, but they had big guns. You know, the dude on the back. Think of the Mummy when they're flying that plane. You know, Wilson. Yeah, the guy shooting. When I was thinking of that, is especially I was playing Battlefield 1, and I was like, wait a minute, how the hell are these bullets not making that thing just instantly go? You know what I mean? It's getting shot to pieces. It's got holes in it. Yeah, it's still going. I thought, well, maybe it's part of the game. Then I look into it and I go, oh, well, they were actually part of war. Why would they have these things as part of war if one plane could just fly past, shoot a couple holes in it, and it goes fucking crashes in the distance? You know what I mean? There'd be no point. So you've got to think that they were reasonable, and then it turns out that obviously after 1937, the Americans did carry on using them until the end of the 50s, and one of the best things that they were good at was sinking submarines. So the British, for example, they quickly designed their own in the First World War because they realized, like, they were tiny and they were useless, but they had bombs on board. They could see the submarines if they were high enough, which they had to be that high to shoot the ships. So they could see them and they'd drop bombs on them. And there's recorded cases of these things flying in particular in World War II as convoy companies, because if they had a Zeppelin or whatever you want flying with them, the submarines couldn't come up because they know they'd get spotted and then bombed. So you start to think, like, wait a minute, why did these things just suddenly disappear and we don't really hear much about them? Well, it turns out that obviously these things were the fastest way. Well, they were the fastest thing across the Atlantic. So they were the fastest way across the transatlantic.
They were the first drones.
Blimps are still majorly used by Lockheed, all the major military.
That's sick.
And 2 years, right? 2 years after the Hindenburg crash. So bearing in mind, the Hindenburg crashes in 1937. And then the final one is decommissioned in 1939, the same model. So they were like, yeah, these are useless. We'll get rid of them. Well, guess what? Boeing released their first plane that can make it across the Atlantic.
No way.
Yeah, Boeing released
think about it though. Like, those things were massively threatened by planes. Like, I bet if you pierced a Hindenburg Hydrogenberg with an oxygen candle, that thing's gonna go down.
Yeah, probably. Like these ones are especially hard to puncture, and especially when they're made up of bubbles on the inside. So if you pop the outside, there's more bubbles on the inside now.
But why man the thing when you have radio control also? Because that
so
was
the Germans were using like television before we were using television for rocket control and everything. But the idea of having the idea of having people being brought back and forth. I mean, like before one person flew across the Atlantic, 40 people had been taken across the Atlantic, or 140, you know.
You've got to remember as well. So going back to what I was saying about Boeing had suddenly come in, right? Boeing is an arm of the military industrial complex. Okay, so we know that for a fact, right? Boeing come in,
That's hot.
and
I like
this
this.
this is a big difference as well because most of
Love wood
the
planes.
American and US planes use petrol. And obviously, we know that the petrol dollar and etc. goes on to become a big thing. The
When you say
American,
petrol, do you mean
sorry,
gasoline or petroleum? Because like
well,
jet fuel petroleum is a little bit different from the gasoline you put in your car.
Point is,
yeah,
it's
no,
not-
I'm pretty.
yeah,
So I'm
it's
pretty.
still
I can't remember the exact terminology for it, but
kerosene.
it's essentially, yeah. And the Germans were
I
using
think jet
obviously
fuel is
they were,
longer chain actually.
but well, the Germans were more into their natural gases and
Yeah.
obviously going into their diesel stuff, right? So this is the kind of aspects of it, which is when the Hindenburg crashes, Germany has just annexed, you know, the Rhineland. I can't remember exact dates, but it's moving into Czechoslovakia, and it's, you know, it's soon
Sean,
going to
you've
do all
seen
its business,
the
right?
German Nimsa crafts. Germany was working, and all these Germans all over the world were working on these gas-powered electromagnetic
I was
crafts.
about to ask. These things were running on fucking natural gas.
Well, they
As far as I understand, natural gas and diesel are two opposite ends of the petroleum spectrum, and natural gas is much lower.
A lot of the time
density
these were far more intricate than you can imagine. Some of them would use micro diesel engines in order to produce.
Are these things made of fucking aluminum? Foil?
There's all kinds of different materials involved. I think a lot of times they're using paper and using, you know, like these propellers and things are ultralight. But then
these are hot air powered.
Yeah, hot air
These
and
aren't
gas,
not, like
chemical gas that also rises. But they also have propellers that
lighter
are
than aircraft.
well, but they're also not anti, but they're re-magnetic. They change
The
their
problem with lighter than
electromagnetic.
aircraft is it's subject to drafts.
Yeah,
and it
so
moves
what they do is they create an electromagnetic static, which then they can control which direction the electromagnetic static is pulling ionic particles, and then that pushes it different directions, right? And this is what's going on right now, like ionic gliders.
They have a surgery robot like that. It's this little tiny steel tab. It has no moving parts inside of it, and they just spin it around through your body with a magnet.
These new ionic gliders have magnets all along these strips here, and these are ribbons down in there. And each one of these things, they pick up on ions because of electromagnetic static, and they lift. So it's a solid state vehicle. There's absolutely no moving parts, but it does lift, and it keeps flying for weeks at a time.
S23 said something in the chat. Sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is cool, but it's not anything mystical. It's literally just algebra with shapes instead of numbers.
Yeah, we'll say that while you're on.
And the reason it's sacred is because it allowed us to unlock the secrets of the fucking universe before we had the Arabic number system. Like, we couldn't do long division without sacred geometry because Roman numerals suck at that.
Well,
but yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, no. Well, I was going to say, just to finish off what I was saying about the airships, is if you look at the way that it happened, obviously before the Hindenburg, right? This is the biggest way of travel, and the Germans are known as the big boys. Now, the differences between like the American models, I think they were the K models. These were called blimps. Now, I presume people don't know the difference, but a blimp is one that has no framework. It's just all, soft. Yeah, it's a balloon essentially. Yeah. Whereas Zeppelins, for example, are a semi-rigid or rigid, so they actually have framework.
Zeppelin is a little bit of pizza dough fried up and dipped in sugar at the carnival.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, it's less and less important these days because Zeppelin was the name of a guy and he's dead, and they just kind of generically have stolen the name Zeppelin because he doesn't.
It's more of a brand, isn't it? It's kind of like
functionally.
But functionally, the idea of an airship now usually has a bit of both, and especially because of nano aerogels, the idea that if you puncture this thing, it's like a boogie board. You're not going to get through the next bubble because it's just bubble after bubble after bubble.
Yeah, and well, it's kind of like what you said about the name. It's kind of like jet ski. Like jet ski is, I'm pretty certain it's a model, isn't it? It's not actually
trademark.
But I would argue that aerogel bubbles are essentially framing. It's just a new kind of frame technology that's beyond metal framing.
I would be amazed if they didn't have like a gooey liquid layer that automatically ran into a crack that would be formed.
The point is that there's definitely some kind of conspiracy here because you got to remember the war kicks off with Germany officially, 1939. They know that it's coming. They know the war is coming, and the Hindenburg is the main way of crossing. You got to remember there's a huge German contingent in America. Remember, there was a lot of Nazi stuff. One of the things people won't know is one of the Nazi headquarters was actually in New York in Times Square. That's how ingrained the Nazism was. And I think wasn't it Bush's grandfather was originally
Or-
done for doing money laundering for the
He
Nazis
was
through one
holding
of
on
his
to their
companies.
gold. Yeah.
Well, who
Yeah.
wasn't? But
Yeah, well, exactly. This is the point. So they were very ingrained. But Boeing comes up, doesn't it, with this plane to get you across the Atlantic at the exact same time that all the news media are there filming perfectly for the crash of the Hindenburg. Right. Obviously, that gets scrapped at exactly the same time the planes come in. The military keep on using them for another 20 years because, they're fine for the military, but not fine for the public, So then we get put in experimental planes. And obviously, if you look at today, planes are great compared. I mean, not if you look at any of the recent
Oh yeah,
Boeings,
I wouldn't want to
but
spend 4 weeks going over the East Coast to get to Florida.
well, exactly. But the point is we don't know where that technology kind of would have gone because at the same time, people enjoy going on cruises, don't they? That's a long journey when they don't have to. And I think if you had a real safe mechanism for doing this, I think people would really enjoy it. And yeah, I might be wrong. I have no idea on the subject, but I feel like there was definitely a kind of financial reason to replace the current German kind of fuel, because remember all the factories and
Well,
all
wait
the
a second.
main go on.
I think I know why this happened. Hold on. Can I interrupt?
Yeah, you feel free.
I think that, all right, if you have this war effort going on and you want to support these amazing new flying machines that Boeing is building, you're going to want to have as much of your population paying into that rather than into the one that they feel is a little bit more comfortable and familiar to them, right? So you're going to want to assassinate that industry so that you can really build up that war effort extra hard and make it look like it was naturally happening based on the will of the people.
As well,
Manufactured consent.
yeah, exactly. And remember that the Zeppelin itself is even if they have their own blimps, it was a symbolism of German manufacturing. So to
Yeah.
have German manufacturing floating over your cities whilst you're at war with Germany and you're supposed to be better than Germany
Yeah.
does not look good. So that's a huge reason, because remember, just before this, they used to do these tours where they'd fly their best Zeppelins across the United States, visiting all the major cities, and people would go to the cities to see the Zeppelin fly over.
Yeah.
It'd be a
Mhm.
huge event.
And
And
now
for
we do air
centuries,
shows,
for
especially
centuries
Long
before
Island.
it, people were doing that with airship, like air balloons. Just regular air balloons were landing in cities. So
Exactly, and
the
now
war
they're doing
machines.
it with
Hyper
their
war
big
machines at one
military
point.
ones. And don't forget, they can bomb as well. They've got bombers; they can push bombs out the back. And people have debated whether some of the fires that took place in America in the late 1800s had possibly been started by Zeppelins pushing out because if you look at
dropping cigarettes. Come on,
dropping
Nobody had a
it's, yeah,
camera
it's
back
centuries.
then to point it
I
out.
mean, it's a crazy theory, but I love it. Because
Yeah.
if you look at what the Germans did in World War One, there's one dropped in Liverpool. Look it up. It's the Liverpool incendiary dropped by a Zeppelin. And when you see this, you'll realize this is what they were dropping on people. And you go, oh, because now you might understand why cities could have had fires if you had this technology. It's like your original harp. Try
Well,
and
now it's
look up.
Australia's fault that America burns every year. Did you hear about
Here
the
we go.
eucalyptus troll?
I think you could
They
see
sent
it
us a
there.
bunch of eucalyptus trees as a joke, and then they knew, but
To
we
the
didn't.
left.
That 100 years later, those eucalyptus trees would start burning themselves, literally, like
Metal
flaking
thing.
their bark off, just ready,
Oh,
because
wow.
that's how they reproduce.
Crazy.
No,
Fucking
that's a shit.
Australians.
That's a shit one. Go back. There's a bigger one.
Oh,
You'll see it. It was on that page.
I'll find it. Where did it go? This
It's
guy?
that thing there, the bucket looking thing, right? So they had these, and they had bigger ones, but they
I
dropped
can see
these type
exactly what
things.
that does.
Yeah, they drop
As soon as it
incendiary
hits,
down, and it set fire to
it's a
everything.
big match inside.
Brutal.
And that bottom piece is the center of gravity, so it's always pointed straight down. And as soon as it hits the ground, that screw drops into it, strikes the match, and lights the fire. Yep.
That's pretty sweet. Well,
Yeah.
I gotta do my next show. So, is there any more closing thoughts that you want to point out? Because we should do this again, though. Luke, I love you, and we should actually just like weekly. We should talk about Hindenburgs all the time. It's great.
I'm incredibly honored to be on a stream with you, Ancient Historia. Just want to say that outright. So
thank you, man. I'm honored to be on a stream with you too.
Yeah, it's been fun.
We'll do it again next week if you're free. But also, I'll talk to, because I'm doing an Europa thing. Maybe I'll slip you the stream to that too. We just keep on keeping on.
goes.
Right, well, anyway, thanks, guys.
Chasing all my dreams, aiming to thrive, even